The new Sonic and Fast Friends marketing campaign or whatever is in full effect, and recently we've been getting some interesting news drops with like comics and commercials and stuff like that to promote the Sonic IP. But recently, character bios have been dropped on the new website, which is sending the Sonic community into a frenzy. As you know, Sega has hired a dedicated lore manager for the Sonic franchise because the canon has been pretty messy. But Sonic Twitter has been in an absolute firestorm, so I figured we'd talk about this today. I've been meaning to get to this for the last couple days, but I've been busy. But we're gonna read every single character's bio. I'll give you guys my thoughts and let me know your thoughts on some of this information and if you think it's controversial, because everyone is at war because of these new lore drops. So let's check it out. So our first character is obviously Sonic the Hedgehog, and this falls very much in line with the IDW characterization for Sonic. Like when I look at Sonic IDW, I feel like IDW Sonic is just being very self-referential and being like, hey guys, this is my character, I'm Sonic. I feel like every time he literally talks in character bio, like straight up. Like when you read this characterization of Sonic on this website, you're gonna be like, wait, it's such a weird thing to say. Like I don't know if you guys like agree with me. If you read IDW comics, you might kind of get it, but literally Sonic talks in character bio. Let me read the characterization and you maybe understand what I said. So here's Sonic the Hedgehog's bio, our favorite blue boy. It says that Sonic is the living embodiment of being free as the wind. He's the fastest thing alive. He spends most of his days exploring the world, experience its thrills, and finding new challenges. When he isn't sprinting around at top speed, you'll likely find him savoring a chili dog while relaxing in nature. Sonic is an inspiration to everyone he meets. He gives his friends the courage to be their best selves, and even his fiercest rivals and enemies can't help but respect his unstoppable will. While Sonic doesn't play by anyone's rules, he'll always come to the aid of those in need to ensure they can live as free, as happy as he does. I'm thinking about IDW Sonic when he fights Surge for the first time and he's standing on top of the thing and he's like, I want everyone to live as free as me, even if they're trying to kill and be genocidal and take over the world. I just want him to be free, as happy as me. Like he literally talks in the way this bio says. Like this character bio are things that he literally says about himself throughout the story, but I feel like that's more so IDW trying to tie the whole story of Sonic together. But yeah, so that's Sonic's bio. It's pretty self-explanatory, but this is where it starts to get controversial. Amy Rose. Here's Amy Rose's character bio. Amy is a spirited and athletic adventurer out to share her boundless love with the world. She wields her signature Pico Pico hammer with incredible strength and grace to defend those in need. Amy is first met by Sonic following the guidance of her fortune cards. Unfortunately, the cards didn't tell her about Metal Sonic, or did they? Ever since, she's pushed herself to grow as an adventurer in order to bring love and peace to the world. Sonic Frontiers obviously is where that screams to me. She may not be chasing after Sonic anymore, but he's still #1 in her heart. There's been a lot of debate on Twitter as to whether or not Amy should be kind of like the Sonic Mickey Mouse girl. You know what I mean? Like Mickey and Minnie Mouse type situation. Obviously, I'm not into the shipping stuff or the discourse. I think it's extremely toxic. But, you know, a part of her character, if you are a Sonic fan, is that, like, she was a Sonic fangirl. Like, she always was. And I thought that was kind of an interesting part of her character. But a lot of people are debating as to whether or not this is a good thing. Some people say that because Amy isn't as, like, chasing Sonic and they've toned that down a little bit, they say that her character has been stripped and she's more of, like, just a generic like protagonist and not really any like depth to her character or anything that's interesting or unique about her. So that's one thing that's been pretty controversial. Do you agree with this bio for Amy Rose? Let me know down below in the comments. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other, but that's something that's been controversial, so I just wanted to highlight that and bring it up. Next up, we have Miles Tails Prower. Here is his bio. I don't think it's going to be too controversial. Let's take a look. Tails is just a young fox coming into his own and discovering his full potential. He's a genius mechanic and inventor, as well as a swift and experienced adventurer. He's also an ace pilot with a garage full of Tornado series airplanes. Once a timid boy, Tails was ashamed of how his twin Tails made him different, but then Sonic helped him realize that this difference also gives him amazing abilities, as he uses his tails to fly, propelling him across the land and even underwater. Now Sonic's best friend and partner in adventure, he's grown a lot since those early days. Taking inspiration from Sonic, Tails now aspires to be a hero in his own right. Again, I feel like every single piece of Sonic media from IDW to Sonic Frontiers is basically just taking these character bios and trying to apply them into the game and making it very obvious that they're trying to do that. Sonic and IDW is probably the most obvious of this situation in my opinion, but this is pretty spot on for Tails. Obviously, it's a little bit contradictory of like games like Sonic Forces where he completely regresses, but they're trying to fix that and correct the course. I don't see anything controversial with Tails bio. Let's move on to Knuckles. Here's Knuckles the Echidna. Knuckles is the guardian of the Master Emerald and a powerful gemstone tied to the history of the world. He also safeguards his home, Angel Island, a flying island paradise. He traverses to the Earth's varied, wild environments with incredible speed and impressive gliding techniques, while his stunning strength allows him to climb over or bust through any obstacle. Knuckles is a serious and straightforward warrior, which often leads to friction with Sonic's witty, casual way of life. The two of them are staunch rivals, but with a deep and mutual respect for each other. Over time, in countless adventures, Knuckles has come to open up a little bit and trust his friends he's met through Sonic, and while he isn't the warm and fuzzy type, he'll defend his friends with ferocious determination. So yeah, this again is kind of shoring up the lore for Knuckles and making sure that he's more of a serious character as opposed to what he's been in the meta era, which is just goofy side, like comic relief character. Clearly, Guardian of the Master Emerald is central to his identity, which is something that's been kind of missing from the games for a long time, but clearly in Sonic Superstars that's looking to change. As you see, he's actually guarding the Master Emerald, which is nice, and obviously Frontiers, they talk about it in the Frontiers prologue. So Knuckles being serious and kind of like a Sonic rival is something that's back and central to the plot of his character, but this is pretty much, you know, standard stuff for Knuckles. There's nothing really too controversial about this. Let's move on to the next one. Dr. Eggman. Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik is an unparalleled mechanic and genius. His dream is to conquer the world and reshape it in his image. To that end, he builds sprawling armies of robots and vast fleets of warships. This means he needs a lot of energy to fuel his conquest, so he's often hunting down the power of the Chaos Emeralds or other sources of arcane power. Sonic used to tease him with the nickname Eggman, so the Doctor took it for himself and made it his own. That's something that in Sonic Frontiers, like if you look at the fishing logs, they're really trying to hammer down on that. Again, it's kind of cool to see that. I guess the lore managers obviously had their hands in this. Across all media, they really are trying to do this like consistent thing. IDW, like games, and now like just various media like this. They literally say the same thing in every single one to establish that continuity. Hopefully going forward, this is something that can be fixed, but we'll see what happens. Was once a mockery is now his signature brand, and many fear the might of the Eggman Empire. While Sonic is his bitter enemy, Dr. Eggman can't help but respect the incredible skill and spirit. Likewise, Sonic genuinely respects the Doctor's tenacity, although he wishes he'd use his genius for good. Again, this is IDW-esque right here. I mean, I feel like this is Ian Flynn has his hands written all over this. IDW seems to have a strong identity for what they want to do for this series going forward. You think of the Mr. Tinker arc where Eggman actually turns good because he doesn't know who he is. Sonic just lets him go. He lets him live. He's cool with it. He wants him to live free. Obviously, that's part of his character. Or you think at the end of the Metal Madness saga where Sonic's like, Eggman, like, hopefully one day you'll come around, and then the next day he just like tries to kill everyone. So it's interesting to see that dynamic between them and how Sonic wants to redeem everyone. But yeah, it's pretty much on point for the brand. Let's move on to Blaze the Cat. Interestingly enough, there's a couple characters missing here. Blaze the Cat. Blaze hails from a parallel dimension. There, she is the Imperial Princess of the Soul Empire. There, she is the Imperial Princess of the Soul Empire and Guardian of the Seven Soul Emeralds. She defends and protects it with all stoic dutifulness and overwhelming fiery powers. She is swift, decisive, and shows little mercy for those who intend to bring harm to her people. Blaze's fearsome powers and station left her with a very few friends, and until a fateful encounter with Sonic changed her life. Thanks to Sonic and his network of friends, Blaze found a community that accepted and cherished her. Now, with the power of the Soul Emerald, she can freely visit Sonic's dimension and be with her new companions. Nothing too interesting about that. I'm surprised they didn't bring up like the fact that, I don't know if this is headcanon or if this is confirmed, but Blaze is supposed to be Sonic from an alternate dimension. I'm surprised they didn't bring that up or like the parallels to their characters, but pretty interesting. Let's move on to the next character. Cream and Cheese. Cream the Rabbit is a young girl with a huge heart who's eager to help those in need, even though she needs to help herself from time to time. Always by her side is Cheese the Chow, her stalwart companion, ready to defend her at a moment's notice. Cream was raised to be very polite and proper by her mother, Vanilla. This makes her stand out amongst the casual and energetic crowd Sonic normally hangs out with. She loves helping her mother raise and care for the Chow and living in their prosperous Chow Garden. Is she like the keeper of the Chow Garden? That's pretty interesting. But with opportunity arises, Cream gleefully joins the others and provides support by flying with her massive ears. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much spot on for her. I guess, you know, in the IDW comic, she really does show that spirit and tenacity and kind of like that huge heart that they talk about in this. So nothing really too revealing about this or anything really controversial about the lore. Let's move on to the next character, which is Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow is known as the ultimate life form. He was created by Professor Gerald Robotnik as part of a complex conspiracy involving the military and some ravenous aliens. Shadow has incredible speed, ferocious strength, and a rare ability called Chaos Control. By utilizing the power of the Chaos Emerald, he can stop time and appear to warp in a new position instantaneously. Shadow is always on the prowl for dangers to the world. While he has no love for it or its people, they were cherished by his one friend, the late Maria Robotnik. So once again, oh, by the way, Dr. Eggman's cousin. So they're really hammering on that as well. They had to make sure we know that because that was also said in the egg memos in Sonic Frontiers. They're once again across all forms of media saying that Shadow has no friends. They actually say that in Sonic Prime as well. IDW, Sonic Prime, and I guess now this. He protects Earth in honor of her memory, willing to do anything and fight anyone to ensure no one threatens the world Maria cherished. While Shadow prefers to be alone, he allows himself to trust the occasional support of Rouge and Omega. This is once again very interesting because Ian Flynn has come out and said that Team Dark has no special bond or relationship. This has angered and been very controversial to many fans in the series. So it's interesting to say that Shadow will trust them, but he's not their friend. But I feel like in Sonic 06, you really see that they are friends, and Sonic Heroes, they are friends. And Team Dark is one of the coolest, like, anti-hero groups or whatever that has probably the most interesting dynamic, but they've really kind of neutered that. And I think Ian Flynn actually recently did walk it back that they don't have any form of bond or relationship. But this right here is kind of controversial. I think that Team Dark should have some level of friendship, even though in IDW you'll see Sonic, you'll see Shadow be very like cold and off-putting to Rouge. So I don't know. He said that they're the only ones he can count on for help and they won't question his methods. Next one is Rouge the Bat. Rouge is truly a skilled and tenacious Jill of all trades. She's an expert spy, adept flyer, and accomplished jewel thief. A trained fighter. Even wields custom demolition. Some people just have it all. It says Rouge doesn't play favorites and will happily work for anyone so as long as it gets her what she wants. It says her cunning and wit make it hard to tell she's being coy and when she's really acting as a double agent. Her sincerest bond is with Shadow. That's actually really interesting. Whom she earnestly respects and supports. Rouge knows that she can count on Shadow when she needs him and that he won't question her motivation. That's very interesting. So while Shadow may or may not reciprocate that like vibe to Rouge, she really respects him, and I don't know. I think Team Dark needs to have that bond. Let's move on to Omega though. E123 Omega, he's the last in the E100 series, a powerful battle robot built by Dr. Eggman. Omega is a walking arsenal with a manner of lasers, missiles, and incendiary devices hidden in his bulky frame. If he is asunder with razor-sharp claws that have immense strength. Omega felt like he was being devalued by Dr. Eggman, so he rebelled. Now his single-minded objective is to destroy Eggman's creations and prove to his creator he is the strongest before finishing off the Doctor himself. While there isn't anyone who would call him a friend, he shares a grim rapport with Shadow and Rouge. He knows he can trust them to support his violent campaign without trying to hold him back. So he has no friends either. Team Dark just has no friends apparently. Here's the last and most interesting one. This one actually kind of hints towards a retcon of Sonic 06, or at least something I've been hearing on the timeline of Twitter. Here's Silver the Hedgehog. He's a young, aspiring hero from 200 years in the future. He commands a powerful psychokinesis, which allows him to manipulate objects with his mind, fly through the air, and even teleport short distances. While he means well, his naivety can sometimes lead him astray. You definitely see that in IDW. Silver's time period was once ravaged and ruined, Sonic 06, but together with Sonic, Blaze, and others, he helped restore its blue skies and peaceful days. So this again is very interesting because I'm pretty sure Blaze dies in Sonic 06. Also, Sonic 06 was not meant to be canon. I'm not really 100% sure about that. So it's weird. So this is a scenario where like the lore is kind of messy and you just shouldn't worry about it. But with Sonic and Blaze's help, he restored the blue skies and peaceful days of his timeline, even though he can't remember how. So how does he remember Sonic and Blaze and how does he meet with them? We don't really know. How does that happen if he doesn't remember anything? It's very interesting. These days, he travels to Sonic's time via a mysterious portal that appears when things in the past go awry. He's dedicated to doing whatever it takes to ensure the future remains peaceful and prosperous. So I feel like the Sonic franchise is very different about time travel. I mean, I guess the fact that Silver can just go back into the timeline freely means that, like, I guess, you know, past events maybe don't matter in the future. It's very messy, but Silver's existence in the franchise is, you know, he's a fan favorite character, so obviously he's going to return. But this is very interesting in the idea that it retcons Sonic 06 and no one remembers the events of it, but at least happened. Like, it's Sonic 06 is definitely canon because of this, but it's kind of messy to explain how exactly this happens. Let me know what you guys think about these bios. Any of these controversial? Do you guys have any opinions about this? I want to know what you guys think. These are the new updated bio for these characters. Some new lore stuff has been very interesting, so let me know what you guys think.
You might know everything I'm going to do, but that's not going to help you since I know everything you're going to do. Strange, isn't it?
Metal Sonic is one of those Sonic characters that everybody loves. He seems to be one of the most iconic characters in the franchise. But there's been some ideas circulating amongst the fan base that Metal Sonic is washed up. Gone are his days of being seemingly a direct matchup to the actual Sonic. And now it seems like Metal Sonic is nothing more than a punching bag for Sonic and his friends to beat up on every single time he appears in the series now. So has Metal Sonic lost his edge? Is Metal Sonic no longer the threat that he supposedly once was in the Sonic franchise? Well, we have some new revelations from people that work on Sonic lore today, so we're going to get into that, but make sure to subscribe to the channel with all notifications. And let's get into it. So in order to talk about where Metal Sonic is in the current day and age, it's important to talk about where Metal Sonic was. Metal Sonic originally made his debut in Sonic CD. He is one of the first ever rivals for Sonic the Hedgehog. Metal Sonic is an evil and advanced badnik version of Sonic the Hedgehog that was basically created as a secret weapon by Dr. Eggman for the sole purpose of destroying Sonic. His very existence is built upon the fact that he wants to destroy Sonic, and this is something that when Metal Sonic opens up his own sentient thoughts, you can kind of see it's something that really gets to him. Even though he is a cold-hearted robot, there's definitely a personality deep within the reaches of his AI chip. Metal Sonic is usually Eggman's obedient and silent enforcer, and he's also a very intelligent robot with a very dark side. He's cold-hearted, aggressive, and he's flat-out ruthless. The problem with Metal Sonic's personality is that the results always seem to end in defeat, which seems to drive him to try and defeat Sonic, and it only increases his hatred for him. Metal Sonic is essentially the anti-Sonic. The differences between Metal Sonic and the actual Sonic could not be more stark. One of Sonic's biggest goals is to live life freely and enjoy adventure and give other people the opportunity to do what they want as well, for better or for worse. While Sonic lives for freedom, Metal Sonic has a tunnel vision goal of only one purpose in life, and that is to destroy Sonic the Hedgehog. Rather than being fun-loving, adventurous, and carefree, Metal Sonic is evil, aggressive, and outwardly emotionless with a large superiority complex. But as we see some of his transformation to something like Neo Metal Sonic, maybe it's possible that this superiority complex is actually a result of insecurity, as revealed by some of his dialogue. We were first introduced to Metal Sonic in the beginning of Sonic CD during Collision Chaos, where he steals Amy Rose, and that's basically the only time you see him for the rest of the game, which kind of lends itself to the idea that maybe Metal Sonic wasn't as prevalent as we once thought he was. Other than a couple of holographic appearances throughout the campaign of the story, the only other time you will see Metal Sonic is at the end of Stardust Speedway, which accounts for one of the most iconic Sonic boss battles, moments, and soundtracks in the history of the franchise. What this battle is essentially a race to the finish against Metal Sonic. It's the copy versus the original. Who comes out on top? Well, obviously Sonic wins. The craziest part about this boss battle is that Sonic doesn't even actually touch Metal Sonic throughout the fight. Metal Sonic seems to be the only one that has the capability to hit Sonic. And after a long race against Sonic the Hedgehog, Metal Sonic is defeated by a wall. That's your big bad Metal Sonic. There is something particularly menacing about his classic design, which is the sharp metal claw hands, the dark beamy red eyes, but also just that similar silhouette to Sonic, even though technically they don't really look alike, right? Despite all of the hype for Metal Sonic, he's not really seen that much in the franchise as a super prominent figure. He's in Sonic Triple Trouble, which is a Game Gear game, and he's a boss battle that's quickly disposed of by Sonic in their first ever like true one-to-one fist fight encounter. He powers up the boss battle at the end of Knuckles Chaotix, and after he gets the Dark Ring, he transforms into Metal Sonic Kai, which I gotta say is a very terrifying design. He is very strong, but it did take Knuckles and his team of friends to actually try to defeat him, so maybe he is a little bit more menacing in the past than I would have thought. Other than that, he's a side character in Sonic Drift. He's a side character in Sonic R, and he's an absolute demon in Sonic the Fighters. He's honestly like one of the toughest bosses to fight in this game, and it's not even close. In the subsequent years, Metal Sonic laid dormant in Dr. Eggman's lairs, presumably getting upgrades to match up with Sonic in the future. And that is when he devised his most devious plan yet, and this is when we actually gained access to some of the sentience of Metal Sonic and what his ideals are, because for the first time ever, Metal Sonic rebelled against Dr. Eggman and his army and transformed into Neo Metal Sonic in Sonic Heroes. Neo Metal Sonic had kidnapped Dr. Eggman and taken control of the Eggman army, and also in the meantime he was copying the data of all 12 characters in the game in order to copy their powers, culminating with his transformation into Neo Metal Sonic, which is a powered up version of Metal Sonic that actually has the ability to talk, and he's a lot more free and rebellious to his normal counterpart. This version of Metal Sonic shows just how powerful and dangerous Metal Sonic can actually be. If left unchecked and not totally submissive to Eggman, there's no telling just how far Metal Sonic will go in his quest for domination determination. Eventually, he transforms into the Metal Overlord, which is a flying version of the dinosaur-like monster that he transformed into. He's also powerful enough to pick up and throw entire Eggman battleships. We also get a little bit of an insight into the mind of Metal Sonic when he transforms into this state and actually is able to speak. Claiming he is actually the true Sonic and that Sonic is actually just a copy of him shows just how crazy this guy actually is. Despite all the tough talk from Metal Sonic, the last thing he says in Sonic Heroes is, "Why can't I defeat you?" Just showing how hyper fixated he is on defeating Sonic. And basically, this is the history of Metal Sonic for people that think that he's like this cool big bad villain. For a very long time in the franchise, you had some classic appearances. You had his appearance in Sonic CD, and then this was his like other major appearance in the franchise. For people that grew up with this version of Sonic, this was kind of like your last image or last impression of Metal Sonic, like this brief history of him. It took 12 different Sonic characters plus Super Sonic to actually defeat Metal Sonic, so you can see why he was viewed as a formidable threat at the time. He kind of then fades away back into obscurity. I mean, he's a playable character in the Sonic Rivals spin-off PSP game. He's an antagonist in Sonic 4 Episode 2, which was kind of like his return, but also it's a 2D side-scroller game with basically no story, and Metal Sonic also loses. He's technically the final boss of Sonic Free Riders, where he also once again betrays Eggman, which is kind of a common theme. It seems like he just wants to be on his own. But again, this is just like another random spin-off game with no like major implications to the lore. He's not like a super relevant character, especially when you consider the like mainline Sonic video games, but he is actually brought back into prominence with the IDW comics, which by the way, as stated multiple times by Sega, are canon to the mainline games, and the Sonic IDW comics take place directly after Sonic Forces. Neo Metal Sonic returns in the Battle for Angel Island saga, which takes place in issues 9 through 12, and he actually returns as Super Neo Metal Sonic, and this is our first encounter with him. Super Neo Metal Sonic is actually able to easily toy around with Sonic and Knuckles. However, Shadow the Hedgehog is actually able to dislodge his super form by using the Chaos Spear. It turns Neo Metal Sonic into the Master Overlord. With the power of the Master Emerald, he's slightly stronger than his Metal Overlord form. It takes a bunch of Sonic characters to actually defeat the Master Overlord, but ultimately, the way he's defeated is actually by Knuckles plucking the Master Emerald out of him, and then he's just defeated right away. So some people say it's a little bit anticlimactic that that's how he went out. He was not only dislodged from his super form by base Shadow, he was also dislodged as the Master Overlord form by base Knuckles by just plucking the Master Emerald from him. He's eventually captured and repaired by Sonic and Tails, only to be let go after a failed truce with Sonic, who tries to let him live free, which is the ideology of IDW Sonic, which some people have an issue with, but that's something that's separate for a separate video. But this kind of starts the discourse with IDW Metal Sonic, and in turn, the regular Metal Sonic. People think that Metal Sonic is considered a jobber. And what is a jobber? Well, a jobber is someone who is basically designed to lose. They have the most L's. He's basically the equivalent of the Washington Generals, who are scripted to always lose to the Harlem Globetrotters in the fake basketball games. And that's what a lot of people consider IDW Metal Sonic to be. It seems like he's routinely taking L's and getting beaten down by basically every other character. Although he's outnumbered, he loses to Surge in IDW 50. He ends up getting taken over by the Deadly Six. It just seems like a lot of times he's losing fights. Also, technically, his most recent mainline appearance was in the Sonic Colors Rise of Wisp animation, and he was kind of easily defeated in that as well. So overall, some Sonic fans are not happy with the way that Metal Sonic is handled. But ultimately, there's kind of a justification for some of this. So Ian Flynn, who is a contributing writer for the Sonic games as well as the comics, and he's also a member of the new Sonic lore team, is kind of like our messenger from Sega. So he was actually asked about this topic recently on his podcast. A question asked him and said, hey, why is Metal Sonic so lame? Like, why is he basically the glorified equivalent of a Koopaling from Super Mario? And this is what he had to say in response, because it's actually pretty interesting.
Metal Sonic. For the longest time, a lot of us have had the same complaints about Metal Sonic. That being, he's just really lame now. He went from being Sonic's ultimate rival to just bad guy of the week. And that's mainly because Metal just gets beaten way too easily nowadays. This will probably come off more as a request than a question, but is it possible at all for Metal Sonic to get the same treatment? It's a shame that a character like Metal Sonic is meant to be this terrifying, overpowering menace, but ends up just feeling like the Sonic equivalent of a Koopaling. Oh.
Agree to disagree, because I feel like a lot of the critique of this that I have seen are people missing the point entirely. Like, now, one of the things is Metal Sonic had this mystique of being the super cool rival to Sonic because he wasn't around. Like, you young kids don't know, but like the most we got of Metal Sonic growing up was Sonic CD, and that was it.
Yeah. The
OVA was almost mythical to a lot of us until it came out on VHS. Okay?
Yeah.
It was magnetic strips that went in a box called a VCR. Like, there was a decade where Metal Sonic just didn't exist for the most part outside of the comics. So to have him return to the games with Heroes and become a reoccurring threat was a continental shift for the old fan base. And now he's very prevalent. The thing is, with him around, that mystique's going to wear off. He is the bad guy. He exists to be beaten. And the more that he's around, the more he's going to be beaten. And that is just the nature of the beast. He has to be overcome by Sonic. And in his appearances, thus far, Sonic's the only one who's really been able to directly tangle with him. I know one that's come up a lot is the Surge and Metal Sonic fight. Metal Sonic got jobbed. No, he didn't. He went up against a person who was built from the ground up to go toe-to-toe with Sonic. And she still only came out on top because she teamed up with Kit, and Kit ambushed Metal Sonic. And they got in a cheap win. Yeah, Metal Sonic went down, but that's not the point. He nearly killed Surge. He had domination of that fight, despite the fact that Surge was built to be able to go toe-to-toe with him. Yes, Metal Sonic lost, but to say that that's all there is to that fight is to ignore everything else. In the recent Amy Rose special, and it's fairly frequent, so I'll try to be vague enough without spoiling too much, but she spends the entire thing running and hiding from him. And she doesn't really beat him so much as gets away, temporarily delays. Metal Sonic was a tour de force in that one. He was an omnipresent threat that no one could really handle, just deal with. So we could have Metal Sonic do more against other characters, I suppose, to show that Sonic is one of the select few that can hold their own. But to say that in general that Metal Sonic has not been treated as a threat, I don't buy it. He is always something that has to be taken seriously, and there always has to be a concentrated effort to subvert or defeat or delay or whatever. He can't just be brushed off. He is a threat.
Oh yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like he's never been shown to be kind of outright jobbed in any way. Not really. He's always been just a freaking he's a force of nature, really, in the same way Sonic is when he wants to be.
And don't put him on too high of a pedestal, because his very first appearance, he lost to a wall. So
True.
So that is a pretty valid response from Ian Flynn with regards to the criticism about Metal Sonic. Now, a lot of people consider him to be a jobber, or he's designed to lose, which ultimately, if you think about it, in a cartoon comic book and cartoon gaming franchise, obviously the bad guys are supposed to lose. But maybe there's some merit to the other side that also thinks that Metal Sonic does deserve more, and that he does have this interesting character arc, especially when you consider his true desires and how he almost achieves them, which makes you think that this character has a lot more potential for how he's currently being used, which some people think is just like a punching bag for all the Sonic characters. So what do you guys think about Metal Sonic's current position in the Sonic lore, Sonic IDW, as well as the Sonic games? Do you think that he's being done dirty, or do you think that the critics are overblowing this?
Neutrality to nothing. I saw your mind as you ran through my prison. You have fought machines and gods. They were mighty. They were finite. I am infinite.
The end. This is the little purple moon boss from Sonic Frontiers. First of all, the end isn't even that cool. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, the end is not even the coolest moon in the Sonic franchise. First of all, this moon from Sonic Adventure 2 is way more cooler and way more fire. No, pun intended, like it's actually more fire than this stupid purple ball that you fight at the end of Sonic Frontiers. Like, man, this was such an underwhelming, like, looking boss. Listen, the monologue was raw, don't get me wrong, but to sit here and say that this final little circle was supposed to be like death incarnate or whatever, after getting really like a ginormous build-up, was a pretty big letdown. But reps from Sega, in particular the people that actually write Sonic Frontiers or contributed to the writing, Ian Flynn, just chimed in about an Easter egg from Sonic Superstars, which has people debating the final boss in Sonic Frontiers. Sonic fans are now, once again, at each other's throats, of course, and people are mad. So let's get into the discourse, but before we do that, please subscribe to the channel with all notifications right now. I'll give you a second. And please drop a like and also drop a comment down below. Contribute to the discussion so the word gets out. So who is the End? The End is the final boss of Sonic Frontiers, the person that essentially manipulates Sonic all throughout Sonic Frontiers. He needs to destroy the Titans, tear down the wall between dimensions, and then he can save his friends because he's the key. All throughout the game, the End is actually basically on your team. It's pretty much like your tutorial guide throughout the story, and it's going to tell you how to use your power-ups and stuff like that, where you got to go. It's basically guiding Sonic throughout. He needs to save his friends, so who else is he going to listen to? It's been pretty obvious throughout the story that obviously this thing was going to betray you, and they definitely foreshadow that throughout the campaign. You will get slow drip bits of information throughout lengthy gameplay tasks. So you get little bits and pieces for the entire duration of while you play Sonic Frontiers, although for me, I was so damn confused by the end of the game when I saw the giant moon, I lost it. I'm like, dude, what the hell is this, bro? So who's the End? Little is known about the End's past, but tens of thousands of years ago, it traversed through the universe that Sonic lives in, and it destroyed countless stars and planets, which consequently fled many civilizations and planets to their doom. The Coco kind of foreshadowed this, as these are the spirits of the ancients that fell to the End. Eventually, the End came to the Ancients' planet and destroyed it, which caused the Ancients to flee to Earth. Eventually, the End found its way towards the Earth to destroy it. However, this time, it was met by a resistance from the Ancients who fought it with their Titans. And throughout the story, you will actually see through flashbacks how these events play out. While simultaneously throughout the story, Sonic and his ghost friends are suffering through cyber corruption. Despite the Ancients' best efforts, the End was able to overpower them, so in a desperate attempt to stop it from destroying the world, the Ancients bound the End with their Titans and sealed it within cyberspace to imprison it and prevent it from destroying the Earth. So in Frontiers, you know how we're running around cyberspace and how Sonic has the ability to travel freely between cyberspace and the regular world? This is where the End is imprisoned. But the more Sonic runs through cyberspace, which he needs to get the keys to get the Chaos Emeralds, he gets exposed to cyber corruption, which actually grants him a new technique each time. Sonic eventually overcomes it with the power of friendship, which is probably the worst part of the story, which eventually gets fixed. Once Sonic breaks the final seal, the End escapes cyberspace and takes control of the Titan it was bound in there with, which was Supreme, and threatens to destroy the Earth. Sonic becomes Supersonic, defeats Supreme, and the End escapes into space to reveal its true form, which is a giant purple moon. What people love about the End was that it was a malicious entity and its only desire was to destroy civilizations and consume worlds. The fact that it was able to manipulate Sonic, and a very lengthy monologue about how the End represents death itself and that it's infinite and that nobody can escape the End no matter if it's defeated, made everyone forget that it's a giant purple rock. And the final boss was the stupidest, most goofy thing ever. Any threat that I thought that this thing had, minus the scary monologue, yes, it was cool, but at the end of the day, like, this is what we had to deal with in the final boss. It was so lame. Sega actually came out a couple months later and clarified, you know, why it's a stupid purple rock, and maybe took back why it looks so stupid, but you would never actually know this unless you were on Sonic Twitter. They said that the End never actually showed its true appearance in the game, and this is because the End's appearance varies from person to person, serving as a visual representation of what they perceive death itself to look like. Listen, if you think Dr. Eggman without a mustache is actually what death itself looks like, well, guess what? That's what the End actually is. This probably led a lot of people to think that this boss was a lot cooler than it actually was, and I will agree with most of the sentiment of the discourse that we're going to get into, saying that this boss was missed potential, which I totally agree with. And to Sonic Team's credit, I think that once they improve the actual set where you fight the End, because if you compare it to the Galactica shooting stage, it really minimizes how cool the boss could be, but when you're fighting him in the Supreme Arena in Sonic Frontiers Update 3, you really get to see the size and scope of how big this boss is, and you get a lot more direct conflict that you actually feel. You feel the size of how big this enemy is, so he's definitely redeemed, and I'm actually satisfied with the conclusion of Frontiers with Sonic Frontiers Update 3. But at the same time, it's hard for me to take the purple rock seriously. Yes, he had a cool monologue. They definitely improved how threatening it looks in Sonic Frontiers Update 3, but you know what they say, a first impression is definitely extremely important, and our first impression with this boss was not that great. There's a bunch of fan art out there that kind of highlights what the boss could look like. I'll make sure to show their DeviantArt. This is just me like checking it out real quick. Like, if the End actually looked like this, like if this was kind of what it looked like, I don't know, maybe I think I'd like it more. But yeah, I do agree with the fan base's sentiment about how there's missed potential, and let's get into that sentiment and get into the actual discourse. Catch you up to speed, if you played Sonic Superstars, I'm actually playing right now. Oh my god, do you see that little moon in the top left corner, right? Oh my, I'm dead. Okay, I'm dead. All right, here's the best shot right here. If you look right here in this top right corner, like, this clearly is the End, whether or not they say it's the End or you know what I mean? Like, this is obviously like the same model, like it's the same picture, okay? So yeah, again, if you look right here, like that clearly looks exactly like the End from Sonic Frontiers. Whether or not it's actually canonically the End, I mean, clearly, technically, canon-wise, no, it's not the End. It's at least an Easter egg or something like that. Oh my god, Sonic died again. So the big hiccup about this theory actually comes right here. If you look in the corner right below this little Eggman Sun thing, see where my mouse is, that right there also looks like another version of the End. It looks exactly the same. To me, it's just like a clever Easter egg, you know, by the developer. developers. Nothing more, nothing less, right? Nope. New developments by Ian Flynn and Sega on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it, now shed some light and context into this matter. So everyone thought that this was the end, but here's a tweet by Ian Flynn which set off the discourse, and this is not like what the discourse is fixated on. The discourse goes well beyond this because there's a couple of extra statements he makes which throws everybody into array. Ian Flynn says everyone is losing their minds over the purple one. So he's talking about the little purple moon right here, which everyone thought was the end. And then he says nobody's talking about the blue one. I don't know if that means something else. I mean, this is the end, or someone on Twitter said this is the beginning. I was dying at that. But he says it's not the end. It can't be. Relax. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, if you ask me, it's definitely an Easter egg. Obviously, like, within the confines of the story, yes, it's not the end because the end was trapped in cyberspace. So the discourse keeps going, all right? So it's not the end, whatever. I think it's the same model. I'm pretty sure it's a picture of the end. I think it's an Easter egg, but who cares? It doesn't matter. Don't come in the comments saying, blah, 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 blah. I don't care, all right? I don't care. And this person tweeted, technically, the end does exist in the classic era, right? I still believe that this era is the past. I mean, of course, it's not free, but does it exist? And he says, yes, it's still sealed away in the classic era, same as Shadow and Mephiles and Iblis and Dark Gaia and Chip and Chaos and T-Call. And as you can see, a lot of people were set off. You know, a lot of people are just chiming in on the discourse. There's a lot of, look, it keeps going. It keeps going. There's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm not going to go over everything, but look at that. Lots of people talking, but wait, this post was actually deleted by author. This is the one that really sets in to the true discourse surrounding the nature of the end. What the original poster said before they deleted it, I actually saw it. It was something to the effect of like the end says that they're infinite and like they're this big omnipresent representation of death and stuff like that. So does that mean like the end is going to return in a future Sonic game? I'm gonna be honest, I don't want that Goofy to return. What's heavily implied that the end is going to return, he said it's blown up, gone. So the end has actually ended. So this person said the original story did imply that it was merely gathering strength by the time Sonic and Sage fought it, and it rambled for 6 minutes about how defeating that incarnation wouldn't do anything, that it would be back, especially after Sonic made it personal like the ancients before. And this is kind of what set people off as well about the end. Ian Flynn said it was boasting. I thought the malevolent arrogance was self-evident. It's gone regardless of ending. So update 3 ending or just the original ending. Which one's canon, by the way? We don't know. And this is what set off the discourse of the Sonic fan base. So everyone is basically realizing that the end was a fraud. He had a lot of potential. You know, a lot of people think about, when you think about a villain with wasted potential, they might think about Infinite from Sonic Forces, although I'll say this. Here's some more lore for you if you guys didn't know. The end is, according to Ian Flynn, the second strongest enemy that Sonic has ever faced. The strongest actually being Solaris, who is from Sonic 06, which actually took 3 Super Hedgehogs in order to be in the past, present, and future. So is the fan base correct about this? We'll get into more of their takes, but is the end actually a fraud? Well, I mean, if you consider like the new ending of the game, it took Super Sonic literally transforming into a brand new form, upgrading himself. Like they literally had to upgrade Super Sonic in order to defeat this boss, whereas no other final boss in the series required this. Before you come at me talking about Hypersonic, listen, I don't want to hear it. He's dead, all right? He's never coming back, okay? So I think if we're power scaling this alone, I would say that the end is still probably the second strongest. I mean, I don't know how strong Super Sonic 2 is compared to 3 Super Hedgehogs or Solaris. I mean, I don't know specifically, but just by default, you need a powered up Super Sonic to defeat this. As a matter of fact, we needed a brand new corrupted Cyber Super Sonic 2 in order to actually defeat the end. Plus the help of Eggman, Sage, Tails, Knuckles, Amy. I would say in terms of power scaling, there's no contradiction for the end being the second most powerful villain that Sonic's ever faced. This person says, well, that sucks. They could have done something amazing with the end, but it was all just for show. That really sucks. Biggest fraud in the series. They always have a cool concept and never run with it. I hate Sonic sometimes. So the end is literally just a worse Sonic villain then. Here's a take I can kind of get down with. This guy says, I'm being so dead ass. Why are y'all complaining about this? No way you really wanted the Purple Rock as a villain to unironically return. Like, yeah, I can get behind that. This person says, I'm sick, and calls the end the fraud. Basically, bro was just yapping. Like, he was, that's all he was doing, bro. He was yapping. Everyone's basically saying the end's a fraud. It's wasted potential. There's a lot of back and forth, but don't worry. Ian Flynn had one last thing to say about this that kind of claps back a little bit. This person actually has a pretty good take. They say, are people who mad not aware that bringing the end back would undermine what the overall ending meant? The point of Cyber Sonic is that Sonic is using the power of the ancients in order to help them all finally find peace, knowing that they were avenged. And to that, Ian Flynn responded, thank you. You got people saying that that's pretty underwhelming. Literally any other god or godlike entity in the Sonic franchise never made a comeback, and the end not coming back is underwhelming. Literal Timekeeper, Sun God, God of Darkness, an immortal alien, and more never came back. I don't know. Just felt like the end fulfilled its purpose. And this person said, to be fair, that's exactly because it wasn't common in the Sonic series to have villains coming back, that this idea of the end having multiple incarnations was interesting. So here's my take on the situation. I'm like, all right, the end was missed potential. That's true. But we didn't think this when we saw the purple rock and it was the Galactica shooting minigame. Like, wasn't that enough to be like, okay, this boss had a lot of missed potential? Update 3 aside, which I think improves a lot of this, like the story of Sonic Frontiers felt really, really flat at the end for me personally when you consider the original ending of the game. But personally for me, like, I never thought this boss was going to come back. So I think the feeling that everyone's feeling right now, I already felt like when the game dropped. So maybe new statements kind of just made everyone realize this just a little bit too late. Everyone took those extra details, I think, about what the end looks like and the monologue maybe a little bit too far and overanalyzed. I personally don't really care about the purple rock. Maybe if the boss looked a little bit scarier, like I said, update 3 improves this, which leaves me satisfied with the conclusion. So it's kind of a mixed bag. So I don't care about it coming back, but yes, it was missed potential. But what do you guys think about this? So Sonic Superstars is officially here, and not without the normal controversy you would expect from the Sonic franchise. The game has been met with generally favorable reviews, although much better than recent Sonic games in memory. But that is not without very hot, debated, and contested fan discourse, especially on Twitter. Today's a day where we're probably going to see more of that as the classic Sonic timeline has changed. No joke, I made a video about this 6 months ago, but I guess YouTube didn't recommend it to most people, about how the classic Sonic timeline has changed. None of this should be new, but maybe I don't have enough Twitter clout. I don't know. Make sure to go follow me over there, I guess. But there is a slight new development that we'll go over to explain this and hopefully get you all caught up to speed. But before we do that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel with all notifications. I'll give you a second to do that. And drop a comment down below, join the discussion so we can get the message of this video out there. I see people talking about this on Twitter. I'm like, bro, I already clarified this like 6 months ago, but let's get into it. So here's the big article and the big cause for concern. Takashi Iizuka explains the timeline placement of Sonic Superstars. This is where a lot of people are confused. The co-op adventure Sonic Superstars made its debut on Switch earlier this week, and if you're curious to know where it slots overall into the history of the series, the head of Sonic Team has now set the record straight. It apparently occurs after Sonic Mania and before Sonic Adventure. Iizuka also mentioned that the team is always careful to make sure the story fits within the lore. Here's exactly what he had to say during a chat with Eurogamer. Iizuka says the classic series began with Sonic 1 in 1991. Sonic Adventure marked the switch to the modern series in 1998. Sonic 4 be damned! So in terms of the Sonic timeline, Sonic Superstars occurs after Sonic Mania and before Sonic Adventure. Whenever we develop a new game, we always make sure the story fits within the lore. So with that being said, Sonic Superstars does in fact take place after Sonic Mania, but before Sonic Adventure, and people are so confused on Twitter. They're like, what? Classic Sonic and modern Sonic aren't even the same. They're different dimensions, blah, blah, blah. So let's give you guys context as to the entire classic Sonic timeline, the new developments, and why this, I guess, as far as their stated position goes, makes sense. Although I'll break down the issues with the overall timeline as well. So about 6 months ago, the classic Sonic timeline was adjusted. Ever since Sonic Generations happened, there was a split between modern Sonic and classic Sonic. Classic Sonic, although for this game was intended to be used as a one-off kind of thing, eventually became a staple of the series. At first, it was fine, but then he returns in Sonic Forces, and this is when the headcanon theories and in-game dialogue caused a lot of confusion for Sonic fans. In particular, a lot of people considered classic Sonic and modern Sonic to be different. This line in Sonic Forces right here is what people point to when they talk about this distinction.
Sonic? You're alive! Wait, what? Oh, you're that Sonic from another dimension, aren't you? Right, that makes sense, I think. Do you know how you got here? Maybe the power that Eggman is using is somehow affecting other dimensions.
So Sonic from a different dimension. In addition to that, there's a time travel tie-in with Sonic Mania. It's kind of messy, especially when you consider the rules for fictional time travel. The idea is basically that it would create a paradox if you were to meet yourself in time travel, thus creating an alternate timeline, because with knowledge of the future, you could alter events of the past. But for the longest time, this is also a headcanon that I had myself. This is what people thought the classic timeline was. So this Twitter thread actually perfectly encapsulates what makes the most sense based off of the rules for time travel and kind of the way the dialogue was handled in Sonic Forces. So a lot of people thought once Sonic Generations happened, the timeline split. Modern Sonic went on to Sonic Lost World. Sonic Mania ended up being a different continuity. They come back together to time trial again, and again, the timeline splits. Goes back to modern Sonic with Frontiers, and Mania Plus happens, and classic is classic, modern is modern. Official statements by Sega actually at one point may have supported this as well.
I heard the 30th anniversary classic Sonic comic, or at least the first story, wasn't canon to the main book, but rather the classic universe, specifically post-Mania. But now the continuity gurus need to know. Is
We need to know.
canon to Sonic Mania the game, or a new IDW exclusive classic Sonic timeline separate from one scene in the games?
I just consider classic one thing right now. So classic stories happen in the classic universe, and don't worry too much about the classic timeline.
So given all that context, it's very reasonable to assume why people headcanon or believe the timeline split, just because it's the most consistent and logical with the rules of time travel. Keep in mind, this was a statement of the past. Fast forward a couple months later, Sega has hired a Sonic lore manager to ensure the universe is more meaningfully connected across games, animations, comics, and more. I talk about this a lot in all these lore videos I do because it's important going forward. Fast forward a couple months later, we start getting these VTuber Tales series where they do a lot of lore drops and they try to connect the universe and clear up some issues with the lore. For example, they made Knuckles Chaotix canon, they made Modern Mighty and Modern Ray canon to the Modern series, among several other massive lore dumps, and one of those is actually finally clearing up the classic Sonic timeline.
One Sonic is tiresome enough as it is. Why are there two running around sometimes?
I wonder what his data speeds are all the way up on Angel Island. Focus, Tails. You probably mean this little guy, right, Knuckles? I like to call him Classic Sonic. That's how Sonic looked in the past. This one here, that's the Sonic he grew up to be. Now, as to why there are two Sonics running around, it's complicated. Tails, you've been researching that. Care to explain?
Right. So, a little while back, Dr. Eggman and his younger self used an ancient being called the Time Eater to mess with all of space-time. The Sonic of the past and the Sonic of the now had to team up to defeat the Eggman. Eggmans? Anyway, as usual, Sonic and Sonic saved the day. We said our goodbyes, and Classic Sonic safely traveled back through the dimensional portal to his own time. Sonic even makes time travel look easy. This next question comes from, Knuckles. Again. He asks, I mean, why isn't everyone freaking out about this? Multiple Sonics? If there are two of them, could there be even more?
Well, Classic Sonic only appeared because of Dr. Eggman messing with the time stream. There should only be that one, right?
Not necessarily. Time is just one dimension of reality. Within the endless possibilities of space, there could be an infinite number of other Sonics out there.
Wow, what would they be like?
When it comes to the multiverse, anything is possible.
So with that, the two timeline theory has been put to rest. Classic Sonic is the younger version of Sonic, and the timeline starts from the classic Sonic games, runs through the adventure games, goes to Sonic Generations, and it's one consistent timeline. There's no split. They further double down on how this timeline progresses and how Sonic Superstars fits into the canon on the most recent Tales tube. Let's roll the clip.
No, speaking of all this history, aren't we coming up on the anniversary of our adventure on North Star Island?
Oh yeah! I wonder if we can invite...
So, as you heard right there, they acknowledge that the adventure on the North Star Islands, where Sonic Superstars take place, is actually canon to the modern cast. Like, the modern cast remembers being there because it's all one timeline. They also acknowledge Trip, the new character from Sonic Superstars, might be out there too. So again, everything is canon, right? So now that the timeline is established, it's still weird and kind of inconsistent when you consider the fact that classic Sonic time travels not only in Sonic Generations to meet his future self, he also time travels in Sonic Mania into Sonic Forces as well. So this is where it feels like it gets kind of inconsistent with the time traveling stuff. And if you consider the rules for fictional time travels and you talk about paradoxes and stuff like that, I would say it's still pretty messy. Let me lay out the timeline that I just drew up for you though. So here's a Sonic timeline that I drew up. You got the classic Sonic games right here, and it flows right into Sonic Mania. Sonic Mania flows into Sonic Superstars, which eventually goes into Sonic Adventure, which goes into Sonic Generations. Now this is where it gets messy. So the classic Sonic of the past comes into Sonic Generations. So you have all this stuff that happened right here in the middle. And one of the biggest things about Sonic Generations is the fact that Sonic meets his younger self. And you have classic Sonic running through all of the adventures that modern Sonic went through. So that would assume that the younger version of Sonic, you know, the classic games right here, experiences the stuff that's in Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes. He literally runs through all those levels. So how is modern Sonic surprised when he meets himself in Sonic Generations? They already met. How do you experience all the stuff you experience in Sonic Generations, go through all the modern adventures, and then the timeline just resets resets back to normal. And by the way, this is classic Sonic. We're gonna call this classic Sonic. This is who we're talking about right here, who, by the way, is now the same as modern Sonic. So, and to make it even more confusing, he goes from Sonic Mania back to Sonic Forces and then comes back to Sonic Mania. You see how this is getting a little bit messy? How do you experience all modern Sonic's adventures and then not recognize yourself in Sonic Generations, even though that already happened to you? And then you time travel again in Sonic Forces back to Sonic Mania. So it's like, wouldn't the Sonic of Sonic Generations and Sonic Forces already know what happens in these games and how to defeat the enemies that he faces and actually recognize classic Sonic, and they wouldn't call him Sonic from a different dimension? So how does he go from the classic games all the way to Generations, and he goes back to the classic games, and a couple years later he goes to Mania, goes to Forces, comes back, meets himself twice and sees all of the Sonic adventures, and then just like moves on? And then there's that scene in Sonic Generations where he's like, what? Another me? Like, what the hell? It's like, bro, you already experienced this. Like, wouldn't classic going from this game all the way to this game while experiencing some of the stuff that happens in between, wouldn't that once he comes back here cause a separate timeline because he has knowledge of the future? I don't know. I think that does make a little bit more sense. It's more consistent with time travel rules, but this is fiction we're dealing with. And I think what's most important for Sonic right now is focusing on the new stories they create, and they're going to do a good job of tying everything together going forward. And some of the messy, inconsistent stuff in the past, they'll try their best to tie it up, but it won't be perfect. But maybe there is some ways that they can explain this. I would say the thing that makes the most sense to explain all of this and make the timeline consistent would be that every time classic Sonic travels back to his own world, his memory is wiped. That would make complete sense, as then it would not cause any disruptions to the future timeline if Sonic goes into all of the events that he experiences in Sonic Adventure onwards blind. The double time travel and meeting yourself thing definitely, in my opinion, would create some type of a paradox, especially considering the way he meets himself. All that being said, though, I actually don't like the idea of there being multiple different timelines and stuff like that, even though I do think at one point it did make the most logical, consistent sense. I do like the idea of like everything that happens in the games and everything that we experience in Sonic Media being consistent and everything matters to the main story is actually better. Although it's not like this couldn't work. Like I said before, the timeline split theory does make sense. This is actually something that the Zelda series does. There's like 4 different timelines for Zelda. Maybe the best solution would be Sonic making games as good as the Legend of Zelda franchise, but I digress. And while I do like the idea of this one flowy timeline, because they're limited to this one consistent timeline, everything that happens between Sonic Adventure and Sonic Superstars, they're limited to just this. Instead of with classic Sonic being able to branch off and really do their own thing with a separate timeline, they're limited to just what's in between Superstars and Adventure. While not a big deal, I can see why some people would prefer to have the alternate timelines. That is the new revelations. That's why Sonic fans are mad. They're confused about the timeline with the classic Sonic stuff. Classic Sonic is just the younger version of modern Sonic. I hope this video was able to clear it up for you. Like I said, I would love for this video to get out there and reach people so we don't have to clear this up, even though we already made a video about this 6 months ago. So please consider subscribing with all notifications, like the video, and share this with as many people as possible to get the word out. The 7 Chaos Emeralds. These magical gems have been an integral part of the Sonic franchise over the years that have helped Sonic go super, which usually helps him defeat the final boss of whatever game that we're playing. In 2022 and 2023, we got some massive updates to the lore of the Chaos Emeralds, so I want to catch all of you up to speed. With Sonic Frontiers and Sonic Superstars, what we know about the Chaos Emeralds has changed. As a matter of fact, what we know about the Chaos Emeralds as of a couple of days ago has changed. Most notably in Sonic Superstars, the Emeralds were once again brought to the forefront of the franchise after being not that important for almost a decade. But it looks like Frontiers and Superstars looks to bring them back to prominence. In Sonic Superstars, there are several different Chaos Emerald abilities, which is kind of interesting when you think about several different factors. Just to give you guys some context, the first major factor that's going to make today's discussion video very interesting is that Sonic Superstars takes place after Sonic Mania and before Sonic Adventure. I have a few videos that explain the classic Sonic timeline just to give you guys a little bit of context if you need it. But the fact of the matter is that in Sonic Superstars, you gain abilities for using the Chaos Emeralds, and this game takes place canonically before Sonic Adventure, so it's like canon to the main timeline. But never again in the Sonic franchise do these Emerald powers ever appear again. So isn't that interesting, right? Something that takes place in the past has abilities that never appear in the future. So in today's video, we have some new updated lore for you that's going to explain this. We'll give you a little history of the Chaos Emeralds, what they are, what the current lore and Sega's position on them is today. A little brief history, but before we do that, please subscribe to the channel with all notifications. I'll give you a second. Love to know what you guys have to say about this. So there's a lot to catch up on in the Chaos Emeralds if you've been absent from the Sonic franchise in the last couple years. The last two mainline Sonic games really gave us a good update about the history of the Emeralds, their origins, and now, apparently, new powers that they have. So tens of thousands of years ago, a technologically superior race called the Ancients fled their home planet in the wake of destruction caused by an almighty entity known as the End, bringing with them the 7 powerful Emeralds as a power source for the Chaos engines to ferry the species as safe. As the spacecraft passed Earth, the 7 Emeralds they possessed resonated with the power of the Master Emerald on the surface of the planet and overrode their navigation systems, causing the Ancients to land on the planet. This planet, also known as Sonic's planet, was the planet they decided to make their new home. They colonized the Starfall Islands, and the Ancients used the Emerald's powers to create cyberspace, a digital dimension to inscribe their knowledge and essence of their soul for safekeeping, and the Titans mechanicized beasts which they would use to battle the End. Although the advent of the End destroyed their civilization, the Elder Ancient had devised a contingency plan, a group of ancient survivors who would take the Emeralds and unite them with the Master Emerald at what would later become Angel Island, so this also ties into Knuckles' story. Their journey would ultimately lead to the creation of the Altar of the Emerald, and the Ancients themselves would later become the Chao that accompanied it. One Chao would then become mutated by the energy of the Master Emerald, thus becoming the water being Chaos. So it's pretty interesting to see that a lot of the lore from the Echidna tribe, Sonic Frontiers, the Ancients, Chaos, the Chaos Emeralds all kind of ties together. Although I do wish it was a little bit more clear with how they explained it in the actual story, nonetheless, it's still really cool to see the big tie-in. Throughout history, civilizations have sought to harness the Chaos Emerald's power, and according to the legend, the ancient civilization on Westside Island used the Chaos Emeralds for advancement of their society and achieved great prosperity. The Emeralds would later play a role throughout the Sonic franchise in several civilizations like the Echidna Clan and the Gaia Temples, the Black Arms from Shadow the Hedgehog, etc., etc. It seems like every ancient civilization had some type of connection to these. So yeah, that brings us to the present day. So that's pretty much the newest lore about the Chaos Emeralds that we learned from Sonic Frontiers. But now we have brand new lore surrounding these mysterious gems, because Ian Flynn on his podcast relayed Sega's current position on the new Emerald power-ups. Because, like we said before, in Sonic Superstars, for the first time ever, even though this happens in the past, the Chaos Emeralds actually have powers. For example, the purple Chaos Emerald will illuminate a path for you to travel upwards. The blue Chaos Emerald will create clones of yourself. The red Chaos Emerald now turns you into a fiery red bullet. The green Emerald can now create ivy vines that you can climb up things with. The yellow Chaos Emerald slows down time, similar to Chaos Control. I wonder if that's something that's stuck in the future. So that's something we could also theorize about. But like I stated before, Sega has clarified why these Emeralds had powers back in the day, but they're never seen again in the Sonic franchise. And the answer is actually pretty interesting. Well, let's roll the clip.
So it's from Stardust Spectre. Are Superstars Emerald powers like a North Star Islands thing? Is it a non-canon gameplay thing? Or are you just as out of the loop as we are? Because I refuse to believe they just never use these again for no reason.
Again, I don't know how much of its lore I can talk about without it coming out through official channels first. But yeah, it's a North Star Island specific thing. There is a reason for it, and I don't think it will be showing up elsewhere.
I mean, you could be wrong, but
I could be. Superstars 2 comes out and, oh, look, now Emeralds do have powers, and somehow they were lost between the classic and modern era. I don't know.
Now we're on the Northwest Star Islands. And it still works.
That fire when we get to it.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Starfall Islands with the cyberspace powers, I guess. I guess that makes some sense.
Special ability locked to a location.
Yeah. There's a lot of stars in Sonic, by the way.
Yeah.
For a series focused on a lot of rings, there sure are a lot of stars.
We've had space stations and alien planets and bizarro starscapes.
So there you have it. A very interesting explanation, and honestly one that I think I'm satisfied with, and one that makes the most sense. The reason why the Chaos Emeralds in Sonic Superstars actually have powers, despite the fact that some of these powers, well, I think the only one we could actually make a case for is Chaos Control, because that involves the manipulation of time using the Emeralds. But if you look right here, Shadow's using the green Emerald and not the yellow Emerald. Even though Sonic actually uses fake Chaos Control with the fake yellow Emerald, Chaos Control is a little bit different though, because it involves involves the manipulation of time to transport, time travel, and stuff like that. So it is actually a little different. But there you have it. The reason why there are powers for the Chaos Emeralds is because it is a North Star Island exclusive thing. And obviously the Sonic canon needs to reflect that, because otherwise it makes no sense. Why do these powers never appear ever again? And also there's a clear explanation for the cyber abilities in Sonic Frontiers. It seems like these will be region locked to the Starfall Islands. That's really cool. And I think it's safe to say that these abilities probably will not return in future Sonic games. At least it's good to get clarification and lore justification for how this will play out in the future. Similar to the Starfall Islands, the North Star Islands have similar region-specific ability properties. It seems like that's the most logical conclusion, or really the only explanation that would possibly work for something like this. And some people might say that that's the issue with the classic Sonic and modern Sonic timeline being the same, is that sometimes it can be limiting because you have to operate within the scope of one singular timeline, although I do prefer one singular timeline. It seems like there's a lot to these North Star Islands that never truly got fleshed out. Not that it necessarily needed to, because in the end, Sonic Superstars is a 2D classic Sonic platformer with no dialogue or language, so the story didn't really need to be much. But when you think about the final campaign of the game and this random purple dragon just like shows up, it's clear that there's some mysteries about these North Star Islands that maybe never got fully fleshed out. Clearly, this purple little rock right here has some type of mystical properties, and I guess it has some connection to this purple dragon, which essentially, barring like slight foreshadowing, is never truly explained to us. If you look right here, that purple rock is still here, and it glows when the dragon appears, but to me, it just like randomly showed up. I do wish that they were able to flesh that out a little more. But that is the newest lore of the Chaos Emeralds in the year 2023. Hopefully, I caught you up to speed. And let me know what your questions are, comments, concerns. If you like this story, if you think it's bad, let me know down below. Blaze the Cat is a very interesting Sonic character that a lot of people like. It's kind of crazy to think about it because she feels so new, but she's been in the Sonic franchise for almost 17 years. Her first appearance was in Sonic Rush in 2005 for the Nintendo DS, but she really hasn't been playable that much throughout the Sonic franchise. It's safe to say that this character does have a very complicated lore due to the fact that she was introduced in Sonic Rush, but she was also playable in Sonic 06, but there's a little bit of a contradiction between the origins of the character and how she behaves in both games. The good thing about the future of Sonic and the fact that they're trying to tie up the lore and make things more meaningfully connected means that there has been a renewed focus on Blaze the Cat, especially if you consider her appearances in IDW. But it does seem like her arc got a little bit more complicated because the origins of Blaze the Cat is really what we need to focus on. So before we get into everything, please subscribe to the channel with all notifications, smash the like button right now, and join the Discord server. I'll give you a second. And hopefully you guys never miss a video ever again. But let's get into the new origins of Blaze the Cat. So Blaze the Cat's first appearance was in Sonic Rush, and she essentially ends up in Sonic's world after chasing Dr. Eggman, and she's from a different dimension. I mean, the plot of a 2D Sonic game told on a Nintendo DS isn't really that deep, but I would say that Blaze has a very interesting character arc, and I would say that she does make the story actually pretty decent. Blaze is a very reserved and quiet character who doesn't really want the help of anyone else, but through, meeting Sonic, she actually learns to trust people, and it eventually leads to her and Sonic saving the world. Without his help, this would not have been able to happen. And Sonic and Blaze end up becoming very good friends. Despite being the sole protector of the Soul Emeralds and being to herself, through meeting all these characters, she truly learns what it means to have friends and trust them and understand that they can actually be a benefit to her. So she has this really good character arc in Sonic Rush, and now fast forward to Sonic 06. If you've ever played Sonic 06, you would assume that Blaze the Cat in this game is not the same as Blaze the Cat in Sonic Rush, or here's the working theory that most people have. I mean, it makes too much sense. I mean, this Blaze is hanging out with Silver in the future. She's from the Soul Emerald dimension. Silver's from the future. Clearly, Sonic 06 was meant to be a reboot, but you have to ask yourself, like, is this the same Blaze? Well, it looks like Ian Flynn and Sega actually have the answers, or at least the current working theory. But let's roll the clip and give you guys some context.
Okay, genuine question. When Blaze, quote-unquote, dies at the end of Silver's route in 06, she actually goes to the Soul Dimension, correct? If so, that means her backstory of being born into a royal family wouldn't make sense, because 06 happens before the Rush games. Was she reborn into that dimension with fleeting memories of Crisis City that she remembers in generations? Is the Blaze from 06 a completely different Blaze?
I can't get too much into it because this is kind of internal stuff that has not been clarified publicly. But Sonic Rush comes first. The Blaze of 06 is the Blaze of Rush. and she doesn't die. She turns into Burning Blaze and warps back to her own dimension and forgets the events of 06.
Oh, good. I wish we could all forget the events of 06.
Wow, so there you have it. I feel like that's a massive lore dump because I think, or at least here's my current working theory, was that Sonic Rush takes place after Sonic 06. It seems to be the canon first meeting of Sonic and Blaze. It feels like it would make sense. No one remembers the events of 06, so had Rush taken place after 06, it would fit a lot better, I think. And this whole timeline time travel stuff just really throws a lot of stuff off. But there's a lot of questions that I have now. The way Blaze the Cat and Sonic meet in Sonic Rush makes a lot more sense for the lore going forward if it takes place after Sonic 06, and I'll explain to you guys what I mean by this. So apparently right now the stated position is that Sonic Rush takes place before Sonic 06, but some of Blaze's characters and behaviors in that game would make you think otherwise. First and foremost, it seems like Blaze is completely okay with Silver killing Sonic to save the future.
So this is where you are. I've been looking for you. What's wrong?
Well, Blaze, to kill someone to save the world, is that really the right thing to do?
You're so naive. Whether it's right or wrong, I can't really say. But what I do know is, if we don't take this chance, the future will remain exactly as it is.
Since he's after Dr. Eggman, let's sneak into Eggman's base. Maybe we'll learn something new.
So in Sonic Rush, if Blaze and Sonic become friends, how is she just okay with killing Sonic? In addition to this, it seems like throughout this game, she has no idea who Sonic even is. Or if she's from Silver's future, it seems like they're from the same world. There's no mention of the Soul Dimension. Well, let's roll the clip.
So that blue hedgehog's the Iblis trigger?
Blue hedgehog.
I'll send us back in time to the point when the Iblis trigger was alive.
Here's another clip to give you guys context as well as to what I mean.
So, this is the past. I hope Silver is okay. He's pretty insecure when he's alone. The Iblis trigger. Blue hedgehog. The Iblis trigger. A blue hedgehog. Can it be true? I need to find Silver fast.
Does this sound like someone who knows Sonic from Sonic Rush? I mean, maybe. Honestly, you can maybe take that inference away. I don't know. When I played this game, it just seemed like this was not the same Blaze from Sonic Rush in terms of the origins. In both scenes, she never was like, oh, I know a blue hedgehog named Sonic. And she also, when she comes into Wave Ocean, she literally says, oh, so this is the past. Well, she's been in this world before, assuming that Sonic Rush comes first. And that is, as of right now, the official stated Sega position. So in addition to the fact that it seems like she doesn't know who Sonic is when she actually sees him in the Sonic 06 story. I mean, considering that they've been friends and have met before, this is how Blaze acts.
Elise! There's still a way to change this. If we return to an earlier point in time, we'll be able to save her.
I understand.
Chaos Control!
Silver! I could handle this myself. Besides, you got somewhere to go, right? You! I'll make sure to change Elise's fate. And that, in turn, should change your future, too. Thank you, Silver.
Yeah, just save her.
There is no way you watch that scene and you're like, oh yeah, Blaze and Sonic, they definitely know each other. They're definitely friends. Sonic didn't even say hello. Blaze didn't say hello. It seems like Blaze is just a bystander and more of like a sidekick to Silver in the future, as opposed to being someone who's in a completely different dimension that actually met Sonic and worked with him in the past. Also, when does Sonic Rush Adventure take place? That is also kind of an issue. Like, if Sonic Rush and Rush Adventure happened before Sonic 06, then that's really an issue. But I would assume that maybe it's Sonic Rush, Sonic 06, and then Sonic Rush Adventure, I guess. I don't know. Let's be honest. The real answer is that Sonic 06 was meant to be a reboot. It failed miserably. It set the franchise back over a decade, and we're still kind of trying to fix the mess from it. which is why going forward, as I've stated many times in these theory lore videos, Sega has hired a lore manager to ensure going forward the universe is more meaningfully connected. Let's not forget, I feel like Ian Flynn wasn't too committed to the answer, and he was more of like a working theory he had at the moment. I think things could be subject to change, but I think the most important thing is to worry about the stories going forward, I guess. I think they could make an excuse or get away with the fact that, you know, Rush maybe did happen before Sonic 06, because it doesn't seem like Blaze knows Sonic, but she does seem a little bit confused when they mention a blue hedgehog. Also, the fact that she knows what the Chaos Emeralds are.
That's a Chaos Emerald. It said this gem can transform your thoughts into power. Collect 7, and a miracle's supposed to happen. Keep it as a lucky charm.
Whereas in Sonic Rush, she didn't. So therefore, if she knows what the Chaos Emeralds are in 06, and she didn't know them and was introduced to them in Rush, then it could still kind of work, I guess. It's not perfect, though. I feel like the last contradiction that we see in this story, though, is definitely the ending of the game. And Ian Flynn said that she doesn't die at the end of 06, even though that's clearly what it looks like, and that she goes burning Blaze and returns to the Soul Dimension. The problem is, there's no Soul Emerald, so how did she go burning Blaze? And how are you going to watch the ending of 06 and tell me with a straight face that she did not just, like, die or sacrifice herself?
We agreed to save the world at any price!
I can't! I wouldn't know what to do without you! Blaze!
Good luck, Silver!
The funny thing is, after Sonic 06, she seems to remember the events, so obviously this is all canon. That's kind of been the stated position. In Sonic Generations, she says, "I thought I'd never find myself in Crisis City again. The world is full of surprises." So, I guess they have an explanation, although, like I said, it's a little bit confusing. I don't think it's meant to be perfect. Because of how much damage Sonic 06 did to the franchise, I don't think they intended for it to ever get this far. But we always got questions, man, and the last thing I'll leave you guys with is this. The Sonic Fast Friends Forever campaign released new bios for basically all the characters that are meant to kind of reflect all of these new lore changes. I made a video about this. It was pretty popular. A lot of people liked it. A lot of people enjoyed it. So if you want to go check it out, you can see the full video. But here are the bios for Blaze and Silver. So here's the bio for Blaze the Cat. It says, Blaze hails from a parallel dimension. There she is, the Imperial Princess of the Soul Empire and guardian of the 7 Soul Emeralds. She defends and protects it, all with stoic dutifulness and overwhelming fiery powers. She is swift, decisive, and shows little mercy to those who would bring harm to her people. Blaze's fearsome powers and station left her with very few friends until a fateful encounter with Sonic changed her life. Again, she's trying to kill him in the next game. Thanks to Sonic and his network of friends, Blaze found a community that accepted and cherished her. Now, with the power of the Soul Emerald, she can freely visit Sonic's dimension and be with her new companions. So you kind of see where the Rush in 06 thing gets a little messy. Here's the bio for Silver the Hedgehog. It says, Silver is a young, aspiring hero from 200 years into the future. He commands powerful psychokinesis, which allows him to manipulate objects with his mind, fly through the air, and even teleport short distances. While he means well, his naivety can sometimes lead him astray. Silver's time period was once ravaged and ruined, but together with Sonic, Blaze, and others, he helped restore its blue skies and peaceful days. Even if he can't remember how, although Blaze does, I don't know. These days, he travels to Sonic's time via mysterious portals that appear when things in the past go awry. He's dedicated to doing whatever it takes to ensure the future remains peaceful and prosperous. So now that you guys have all the context for Blaze's new and slightly more confusing backstory, what do you guys think about it? Are you more confused? Do you have issues with it? Do you agree with it? Let me know down below in the comments. Amy Rose is one of those characters in the Sonic franchise that a lot of fans are split on. If there's one character who has radically changed more than just about any character in the franchise, it has to be Amy Rose. If you have to use the word rebrand or whatever the case may be, or character development, she's probably one that comes into mind. To understand Amy Rose's character, you must first know the backstory and her dynamic with the main character, Sonic. Amy Rose first met Sonic in Sonic CD, where she was kidnapped by Metal Sonic, and ever since she's been obsessed with him. So Amy Rose loves Sonic, and her #1 goal was basically to chase Sonic to the ends of the world, trying to get him to marry her. However, it's an interesting dynamic that plays off of Sonic, because if you know Sonic, he's a character that is free like the wind, and he only wants to live for adventure. Even if you quote his creators, they say he has the heart of a boy. So that means that Sonic cannot be tied down with something like a relationship. That is just not within the means of his character. So the dynamic between the two always played out where Amy would show love for Sonic, and he was either too shy to admit it. According to Sonic Team themselves, it says that Sonic is clearly interested in her, but has always been too shy shy to declare his feelings, or he just wasn't interested. Regardless, he would not reciprocate. But for people who grew up during the earlier eras of Sonic, interactions like this were often what defined Amy Rose.
Gotcha, my darling Sonic.
Amy, what are you doing here?
Sonic, this time there's no way out of marrying me.
So some critics of the series in the early 2000s had an issue with Amy Rose's character, although in my personal opinion, I think that being the sole characterization of her is kind of misunderstanding her character, and we'll talk about that later. But regardless, there's a big discussion on Twitter right now about Amy Rose's character and people from Sega, in particular Ian Flynn, opening up about the choices for Amy's dialogue in Sonic Frontiers, because she is a much different character now than she was then. The dialogue is fiery. People are going back and forth about who truly understands the character of Amy Rose. Is it the new Amy Rose that's the real Amy Rose, or is it the old Amy Rose? So here is the podcast clip from Ian Flynn that set off all the discourse. So when asked about how he wrote Amy in Sonic Frontiers and speaking about how she wants to move on and spread love to the world, this is what he had to say.
The whole goal with Amy's story in Frontiers was to bring it to some kind of end. Because this whole will they, won't they, cat and mouse that we're never going to actually get an answer on felt antagonistic, not necessarily intentionally, but, you know, this constantly dangling carrot without any real commitment one way or the other. It's like, let's just have them move on in some way, do the characters a service so that there's more to them than just the, will they have kisses one day? Do something. And so part of it was Amy's resolve to share her love with the world, to not have her entire existence revolve around someone who's always running away from her. You know, she has so much love to give. She has so much potential. Instead of focusing it on one person, give it to the world and see what a force she can be.
So there you have it. That was Ian Flynn's mindset when writing Sonic Frontiers. The goal of the story was to actually have Amy move on from her obsession with Sonic or trying to chase him around. And now her new premise going forward is going to be, quote unquote, trying to spread love around the world. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't know what that means. Does it mean she goes around and gives everyone a hug or something like that? Or she goes around the world trying to save people? Like, I really never quite understood what that means. And I think she probably had the weakest story in Sonic Frontiers out of all of the characters. So here's the crux of the discourse. People who enjoy the older version of Amy Rose feel like, especially with her not wanting to chase Sonic anymore or pursue him, feels like her character has been stripped and she's very bare bones right now. Like, as if she has no personality. She no longer has any unique personality traits or characteristics other than just being like a generic protagonist. The other side of the fence is saying this. They're saying that this is actually a good thing because Amy is receiving character development and growth. You can't always stay a stagnant character, even though, you know, it's a cartoon character series, so some of these characters do kind of need to have like core defining traits. People on that side of the fence say this is actually a good thing, so it's kind of this clash between two sects of the fan base. Without reading every single tweet, because we could do this for probably hours, here's a good encapsulation of the pre-Frontiers Amy, and it says, expand the character by regressing her core traits and making her more one-dimensional. Amy's love for Sonic and her pursuit of that is fundamental to her character. This started in CD. To try and have her grow out of it is a definition of character assassination. This tweet encapsulates the other side of the argument, saying, man is writing Sonic like an anime and I'm here for it. Y'all want to get rid of the Saturday morning cartoon vibe, but the moment that happens, you push back. Amy's only trait was loving Sonic, and she got very angry and stalkerish as a result. This person says, I don't think it's character assassination. I just think he's trying to expand on the character. She didn't really have any core traits other than being a Sonic fangirl. That got old after a while. I think it's nice to see her becoming an actual character with personal goals that don't involve Sonic. Really interested to see what they do with her character. Make no mistake, Amy not chasing Sonic anymore and wanting to spread love around the world is definitely the position that Sega is taking. If you look at the Fast Friends character bio about Amy Rose, this is Sega's most updated character bio for the character. It says, Amy is a spirited and athletic adventurer out to share boundless love with the world. She wields her signature Pico Pico hammer with incredible strength and grace to defend those in need. Amy first met Sonic by following the guidance of her fortune cards. Unfortunately, the cards didn't tell her about Metal Sonic, or did they? Ever since, she's pushed herself to grow as an adventurer in order to bring love and peace to the world. She may not be chasing after Sonic anymore, but he's still #1 in her heart. So now that you understand Sega's position and kind of what the split in the fan base is, now we can kind of get into what my personal opinions are. And just for the record, most people on Twitter are actually quite displeased with what Ian Flynn said on this podcast. So I would say the fan base is definitely leaning more towards like the older Amy as opposed to the newer Amy. And I have have to say, I think I do agree with the fan base with this sentiment. And here's the reason why. In my opinion, back in the day, Amy Rose was a much more fun and dynamic character for the Sonic franchise. Now, a lot of people say her traits of loving Sonic were a bit toxic, and you can see why people might say that, but even despite all of this, I feel like she had a lot more personality, and most importantly, passion. Keep in mind, that's her theme song in SA1. It's called My Sweet Passion. And Amy Rose was always a character that was fiery and full of passion, while also maintaining her compassion for others. Keep in mind, she also already went through the arc in SA1 talking about how she doesn't need Sonic anymore, and she wants to kind of be her own person and independent without him. So it's like, we already revisited this arc, and why are they doing it again? And that's something they do frequently for other characters in Frontiers. They do the same thing for Tails, where he's just like, oh my god, I need to be my own person without Sonic, but he already did this in Adventure 1. Now, keep in mind, Frontiers is the new era of writing, so I feel like right now, it's going to be a bit messy trying to shore up the canon, but going forward, it's going to be more important to see what they do, because obviously there were several different writing teams throughout the years, so it was inevitable that they were going to have to do some course correction for Sonic Frontiers. Regardless, though, the direction for Amy, I think, was just better back in the day. Even without her obsession with Sonic, like I said before, she was a character that was very dynamic and fun. She was always willing to help those who were defenseless. Look at E102 Gamma when he was about to get killed by Sonic. Also, look at the bird characters who were defenseless in SA1. She also chose to defend them too. And this is without Sonic, mind you. Which most importantly culminates with her going toe-to-toe with Zero and taking him out. There's one thing about the older Amy. She was willing to pop off on anyone. Look at a lot of the scenes in Sonic X. She always had that temper and she was ready to go. Like, people were scared of Amy Rose. And that's one of those characteristics that I feel like is missing from her currently. More on this later. Sonic Adventure 2, she alone breaks into Prison Island, which is a top-guarded government security facility, in order to save Sonic. But also, in the same game, she's the one that's able to convince the cold-hearted Shadow the Hedgehog to actually save the world. So there's many layers to her character, and I feel like she was always so good. So she's not only compassionate, she's also fiery, brave, and heroic. In Sonic Heroes, Amy Rose is the undisputed leader of Team Rose, and she takes them on an adventure across the world, and she eventually helps Sonic and friends defeat Neo Metal Sonic. In Sonic 06, he single-handedly stands up to Silver the Hedgehog, who is clearly powerful enough to at least take on Sonic, and says she will do anything to protect him. So she's clearly brave and heroic. This idea that she's like this damsel in distress that needs to like go spread love with the world or whatever that means never really made sense to me, because she has several great character moments where she's a great hero in her own right. Like I said before, she was always willing to pop off on anyone. Even in Sonic Riders, like, she's willing to whip out the hammer and chase after Sonic if he like abandons her or does something wrong. To me, it just indicates like, yo, she's ready for the smoke whenever. Especially when you watch Sonic X as well. Like I said before, she struck fear in the heart of a lot of characters. So the biggest things that come to Amy that I think about was fiery and passionate. So with that being said, I do kind of agree with the sentiment of the fan base. A lot of people are saying this as well. They don't like this new character arc for Amy. There's different ways they can go about it. There's better ways that they can do it. For the most part, I mean, there's some good moments in Frontiers, but for the most part, I feel like the Amy that we're dealing with in this game is a lot different than the Amy that we knew in the past. I can't really picture this Amy just like whipping out her hammer and going on fire and just like taking on Eggman in this game. There's some moments, it's not all bad, but I would love to see them push it forward and do the best that they can possible for the franchise. And a lot of fans feel that way too. Feels like they stripped away a lot of the fun of Amy Rose's personality just based off of Frontiers, and I would kind of like to see some of those more fun moments return to the franchise. So let me know what you guys think about this. I don't really care one way or the other that much, but you know, I just want to throw my 2 cents in there and see what other people think. If you disagree, feel free to let me know down below in the comments.
I'm Shadow the Hedgehog, and I made a promise that I intend to keep. With the power of these emeralds, Black Doom and his army are finished. This is who I am.
Shadow the Hedgehog is a character that the fan base has been extremely split on over the last couple of years. It's no secret that ever since Sonic Colors released back in 2010, there's been a complete tonal shift for the entire franchise. And you know what? It was much deserved and well needed. For all the nitpicks people have about the meta era of Sonic, it was a necessary evil in order to keep the franchise afloat, because it got back to the basics for Sonic and really put out a bunch of high quality games, at least in the beginning of this era. And one of the big changes that this era brought was a complete 180 in the characterization for Shadow the Hedgehog. A lot of people at this point in the franchise did not like the way he was portrayed. Despite a lot of good things coming out of this era, a lot of extremely poor business decisions by Sega, like Sonic Boom, Rise of Lyric, and the whole soft reboot, caused Sega to once again in 2020 hit the reset button after Sonic Forces, and the Sonic movies helped propel Sonic back into prominence. The series was once again heading for a tonal shift, out with the old writer for the games, and now we're in a new era with new writers for the franchise like Ian Flynn, who was a longtime writer of of the Sonic Archie comics. Sonic Frontiers was largely viewed as a big success for the franchise, and this is evidence of the tonal shift that once again was taking place. Fast forward to 2024, it is now the fearless year of Shadow. Shadow the Hedgehog is now brought back into the forefront after being what many believe to be a character that has missed his potential, has been mischaracterized and written poorly for the better half of over a decade. Especially with Sonic Movie 3 on the horizon, it is very important that they get Shadow right, because at this point, we have a new Shadow. We have a new direction for the character, new direction for the franchise, period. So like I said before, there's this idea circulating within the fan base that Shadow the Hedgehog has been seriously mischaracterized and misrepresented over the years. But now, once again, the spotlight is on Shadow this year with the refocused marketing campaign, especially with Sonic and Shadow Generations right around the corner. We're gonna get something like a do-over for Shadow, right? We're gonna get a deep dive back into his past and maybe give him a chance to be considered cool again. It seems like recently his character has just been overly edgy anti-Sonic. His sole purpose for existence seems to be, okay, just to post Sonic, just be grumpy, be miserable, and you see a lot of that characterization throughout the meta era, as well as the writing, voice direction, and everything like that. According to people on the Sonic Lore Council, like Ian Flynn, who goes on his podcast and kind of relays the messages from Sega, it's not all him. Like, let's not blame this one guy for this type of direction. It's obviously coming from the higher-ups, but they say stuff like Shadow the Hedgehog doesn't even claim Team Dark. Like, he's not even friends with them. If you play games like Sonic Heroes and Sonic 06, like, that idea just sounds ludicrous to, like, early 2000s Sonic fans. So now we have our second shot with Shadow, and everyone wants to know, how is he going to be handled in this game? Why is Shadow the Hedgehog, quote-unquote, lame now? Well, we got an answer for you guys from Sega, from the writers themselves. So now everything post-2022, post-Sonic Frontiers, with new writers is going to have a lot of eyes on it. Every single project that releases featuring Shadow, or basically any canon characterization that's displayed, is going to be under a heavy microscope for Shadow. There's two major events I'd like to highlight and I'd like to dissect. We have the recent Tales Tube episode, which has been under heavy scrutiny ever since it was released, that actually shows Sonic and Shadow in it, displays their relationship, and also gives us a glimpse as to how Ian Flynn will write Shadow in a game. I mean, he's been written in IDW, and a lot of people have flaws and issues with that, which we can get into. But this is kind of like our first time hearing him, like, fully voice acted and written by Ian Flynn. To keep a long story short, here's what one side of the fence is saying. This person says, I was just told that on the recent Tales Tube, Shadow's personality is the current direction for him. Oh man, this is terrible because now we have Shadow Generations. I'm so tired of this. Shadow Generations is already doomed. This person says, we're never getting the real Shadow back, are we? All right, this one's pretty funny. It says, Shadow is slowly morphing into the Sonic equivalent of Wario. Oh my god. For the love of God, please stop writing him as Vegeta. And that's what actually a lot of people compare Shadow the Hedgehog to, especially with his current direction. So that's kind of one of the general vibes of the fan base. Listen, if you like Shadow's current direction, that's okay, more power to you, but I just want to present all the information that's available. So here's what Ian Flynn actually said on his podcast. Let's roll the clip.
Tales Tube. Is that still Shadow's direction? Or more of a comedic exaggeration a la the Twitter takeover? I loved him in Murder Of and was hoping that would rub off on him in the future.
That is very much his current direction.
Oh boy.
That is after lots of notes and revisions.
As you can see, that's what Ian Flynn had to say about the current direction of Shadow. So if you don't like what was displayed in the Tales Tube, keep in mind, that's the direction that Shadow's going to have going forward, at least in the game universe. And you'll notice what Ian Flynn said after several revisions and several notes. So clearly, this is a mandate from the higher-ups. Do not go and get angry at Ian Flynn personally if you don't like the change. But that's just the reality of the situation when it comes to Shadow's characterization. So now that you had the context, you had the backstory about Shadow's characterization, I would like to highlight some certain things about this discussion. First and foremost, I'd like to start off with the Tales Tube, which is kind of the center of all this discussion. In the Tales Tube, it seems like Shadow is characterized as just like extremely over edgy. For no reason, he's just completely at odds with Sonic, and he seems overly antagonistic towards Sonic for no reason. For example,
I don't know, buddy. We never really got along.
From the moment we met, we've been at odds. We're polar opposites.
I don't know. I think my magnetic personality is quite attractive.
And yet when you're near me, I feel repulsed.
Friendship achieved.
Friendship? If he gets in my way,
I'll crush him like any other.
Well, Sonic and Shadow, you know, they have been at odds, especially in like some of the games over the years. Usually the circumstances in the game account for that. It's not like Shadow is coming at Sonic for no reason. It's typically because their goals may not align at the current moment. So when you see Shadow unprovoked, basically for no reason at all, saying he's repulsed by Sonic, it just does feel a little bit out of character, and it just feels like it's a different version of Shadow. I also think that the voice acting also oversells this a lot. I'm not the best at putting these kind of things into words. I think I'm better at showing. So why don't we listen to some voice clips of when I think Shadow the Hedgehog was at his best. Just a couple of examples.
I might as well go look for that Master Emerald, since that irritating echidna is here.
Something's never changed.
What are you saying?
Sonic, I think I've discovered what the ultimate life form is. It might be you.
I'm Shadow the Hedgehog, the one and only ultimate life form. Thanks to Amy, I was able to remember Maria's wish. When I finally realized it, the Ultimate Life prototype tried to stop me. I'll take care of this, Sonic. You go try to stop the power of the Chaos Emeralds.
So these are voice clips of what made Shadow rise to becoming the second most popular character in the franchise. I wouldn't imagine that some of the newer stuff has created some of those more iconic moments for Shadow. Now, there's time for that to return in the new Sonic and Shadow Generations game, and we're getting a second crack at this being an opportunity. I'm very optimistic that it could be a reality. However, some fans are definitely skeptical, but when you listen to those voice clips of Shadow, he just sounds effortlessly cool. There's no forced rasp in his voice. There's no edge. You can tell that sometimes he can crack some humor, sometimes he has a charming sense of confidence, there's emotion and empathy, and it doesn't sound like a raspy old man. For the record, I'm also a big Jason Griffith fan as well, although I think David Humphrey truly plays the role perfectly. Jason Griffith is like right behind him. It's just as good, almost. Now, let's compare it to his current voice.
Killus, this new reality holds deeper secrets, and I intend to find them.
Fine, disappear then. Fred's doing a better job than you anyway.
Billund has more of creativity or cows. Hold for laughs and or applause. I hope you brought your helmets, kids, because my bike only has one gear. Adventure, with its turbocharged brakes and sleekly designed chassis.
Shadow.
Saving the world? You? Don't make me laugh. You're weak. And you know what makes you weak? Your loyalty to your pathetic friends. You're not going through that portal. I'm gonna show you just how weak you are.
Aside from writing and characterization, the acting has something to do with this as well. Now, this is just my personal opinion, and if you like this version of Shadow, that is okay. But a lot of it kind of portrays like what people's feelings are of Shadow. I mean, you think about like the IDW Metal Virus Saga, where Shadow isn't smart enough and he just decides to fight the Zombots knowing that it's a losing battle. A lot of people didn't like that characterization in IDW. There's just been a lot of things over the years that fans do not like about Shadow, which also brings us into the new character bio for Shadow, which I also believe has some flaws in it as well. Because personally, I am kind of on the side of Shadow just not being the same Shadow. It feels like the Shadow that we currently have right now feels like a parody of Shadow or a Shadow skin suit. It's not the real Shadow the Hedgehog that we all know and love. In particular, games like SA2, games like Sonic 06, I feel like that is the true Shadow. Here is the current bio for Shadow the Hedgehog. It says, Shadow is known as the ultimate life form. Okay, that sounds good. He was created by Professor Gerald Robotnik, Dr. Eggman's grandfather, as part of a complex conspiracy involving the military and some ravenous aliens. Shadow has incredible speed, ferocious strength, and a rare ability called Chaos Control. By utilizing the power of a Chaos Emerald, he can stop time and appear to warp around in a new position instantaneously. Shadow is always on the prowl for dangers to the world. While he has no love for it or its people, they were cherished by his once friend, the late Maria Robotnik, Dr. Eggman's cousin. Willing to do anything, willing to fight anyone to ensure no one threatens the world that Maria cherished. This, in my opinion, seems to be the first mistake that they're making with the characterization of Shadow. Keep in mind that bio is in line with the current direction. While yes, in SA2, Shadow the Hedgehog tries to destroy the world, that was only because his memories were tampered and manipulated with, and he wanted to get revenge on his friend Maria, who he cared dearly for. You'll see an example of Shadow caring for others in the cutscene in SA2 where he has to save Rouge. He was reminded of the fact that he was not able to save Maria during the situation, so he tries to right his wrong by saving Rouge. I mean, this is someone who clearly cares about other people. In addition to the fact that he really cared for his dear friend Maria, Shadow shows empathy and emotion when he has to team up with Sonic to save the world, where Amy Rose was actually able to convince him of this, which even causes Edgy the Hedgy, Mr. I don't care about anything in the world, Shadow the Hedgehog, to shed a tear. But yes, we all know that Shadow the Hedgehog was supposed to die at the end of SA2. He falls to Earth and gets amnesia. And what is the first thing Shadow the Hedgehog does, you know, Mr. Amnesia, Shadow the Hedgehog does when he's freed from his little prison? He goes and immediately saves Rouge the Bat without question. This is the first thing he does after his amnesia. So this once again doesn't really seem accurate with the idea that he doesn't care for people in the world. Even in Sonic Battle, which is also canon, which has a pretty decent characterized Shadow, he even questions what he is in this game. He says, we were created as weapons, so why do we have hearts? Why do we have souls? And Rouge hacked Gerald Robotnik's computer and learned about the origins of Shadow. And Shadow asked, why did Gerald give me a soul? She said he was not interested in researching weapons. He was researching a way to bring happiness and hope to all people. She also said that his soul was identical to the beloved Maria. Rouge said, Shadow, you're afraid of your own power and it troubles you, but you've never used your power recklessly, and you've never used it selfishly, and Gerald's wishes have come true. And she told Emerl that you are a weapon and yet you feel sympathy for living beings. However, Gerald did not create you, and he was unable to completely erase the destructive powers within you. That part of you still exists. So he programmed you with a special code, and if the keywords to that code were to be activated, Gerald's program would be complete and you'd be just like Shadow. So what Rouge was saying, if you pay attention very closely, is that Emerl, just like Shadow, was created with sympathy for living human beings. So that right there kind of disproves the narrative that Shadow does not care for people on Earth. Even in Sonic 06, Shadow is working as a gun agent, the one agency that he sought to destroy because they took everything from him. He has now put his past aside after Shadow 05 and is working with them. I think in this game, this is one of my favorite versions of Shadow because he's not overly edgy. He's calm, cool, collected, and tries to once again save the day. Another example of when we see Shadow showing that he cares is the scene in the future of Sonic 06 where E123 Omega is dead, and you can see Shadow is visibly upset with this. Maybe he doesn't outwardly come out with it. There's no doubt that he's bothered by it. Or in IDW issue number 34 where Shadow finds a bunch of Chow locked up, he calls the guy utter scum. Like, this guy does care. Even one of the most iconic scenes in Sonic 06 truly demonstrates that characterization for Shadow.
Why fight at all? Why risk your life for those who will persecute you later?
If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight like I always have.
It's scenes like this that demonstrate why Shadow was the second most popular character in the franchise. And the notion that he doesn't care for anyone in the world just doesn't seem fully accurate. But also the other elephant in the room is now they claim that Shadow and Team Dark were never friends. Knowing all the things they went through together in games like Sonic Heroes and Sonic 06, or even scenes like this.
Shadow, even if you believe everyone in the world will be against you, know that I'll always remain by your side. Remember that.
I will.
The idea that Team Dark is just merely associates does not sit right with me, and once again we also see just how effortlessly cool Shadow was. I could never picture the current Shadow having a scene like that. So given that this is the current direction that Sega wants to go for Shadow, you can see why some people in the fan base are a little bit upset by this, but I'm still gonna wait for the game to come out, and I think that they're gonna do some good things with it, hopefully. It also hasn't been all bad with Shadow. For what it's worth, like, I don't think he's bad in Sonic Forces. Somehow, some way, he's really good in Sonic Prime. Like, he gets angry and he's at odds with Sonic, but it's because Sonic is completely stupid in this show and causes all of that. If we can get this version of Shadow in the games, like, I'm very cool with that. So let me know what you guys think about the current direction of Shadow. Is he lame or is he not? Shadow the Hedgehog is a character with a complicated backstory. The origins of Shadow are so mysterious, and it's one of the most compelling Sonic narratives ever told. Even Shadow himself struggles with understanding his true origins about who he is and why he was created. You have to ask yourself, how is a character who was supposedly created 50 years ago have the exact same identical appearance and abilities as Sonic the Hedgehog, who came way after Shadow? Fans have concocted a theory about the origins of Shadow. This is something that a lot of people have headcanoned over the years, and it feels like out of all the theories you could possibly attribute to how Shadow was created, this one absolutely makes the most sense. But after all these years, this theory may have finally become true and confirmed by Sega. To understand the theory, you must first know the origins of Project Shadow. Project Shadow was conceived over 50 years before the Black Arm's arrival on Earth. For those of you who don't know, Shadow is at least part Black Arm's alien. This was conceived by the president of the United Federation, which is like the United States counterpart in the Sonic universe. The premise of Project Shadow was conceived with hopes of achieving mankind's ultimate eternal dream, which is researching for immortality. However, the true intent for the project was to use results to develop weapons of mass destruction. The president personally requested Professor Gerald Robotnik, who was Eggman's grandfather. Initially, Gerald refused, believing that this crossed the limits that man should not tamper with and that they would use his research for war. So, you know, he wasn't a bad guy after all. He was just dealt a very unfortunate hand. However, Gerald Robotnik believed that he could co-opt this research in order to help find a cure for a terminal illness that his granddaughter, Maria Robotnik, was suffering from. That's why Gerald eventually accepted the request and agreed to lead the project on Space Colony Arc. In the beginning, the professor and his colleagues researched the Chaos Emeralds, which resulted in the creation of the Chaos Drives during tests to apply Chaos Emerald energy to living beings. You will notice that these are used to power the many gun robots you will face throughout Sonic Adventure 2. When the test proved successful, the project moved on to creating the prototype of an immortal being dubbed the Ultimate Life Form, and that is where we get Shadow the Hedgehog. During development, Gerald needed help with his work, and as such, he made contact with Black Doom, the alien leader of the Black Arms race, during the 50-year return of the Black Comet, in exchange for the 7 Chaos Emeralds being delivered to him in 50 years. Black Doom even assisted the professor with his research, going so far as to provide his own genetic material in the form of his own blood. The first Ultimate Life Form prototype that was produced by Project Shadow was actually the BioLizard. When he was brought to life, his external engine and chaos control inducing organ were working normally. The BioLizard demonstrated many of the desired traits as he grew, including regeneration and self-reproduction, though he required a life support system fueled by chaos drives in order to remain viable. While the researchers were overjoyed over the BioLizard's evolution, their joy proved brief. In addition to having an unexpected and exponentially fast growth rate, BioLizard was like a primitive animal, not like Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic and all of his friends who are anthropomorphic animals that are sentient beings with access to traditional morality. He did not have the strength to walk, and eventually he became so unstable that the researchers had trouble controlling him. So over time, the BioLizard was actually scrapped, and now this is where the DNA of Black Doom comes into play. It's not clear as to whether or not the BioLizard contains Black Doom's DNA, but we know for sure that the next Ultimate Life Form definitely had Black Doom's DNA. Doubts about Project Shadow began within the government after details leaked about the violent nature of the BioLizard. People were questioning the duration, significance, and safety of the research. Internal staff had witnessed the prototype going out of control, and with contact of the Black Arms aliens, the government was getting extremely skeptical about this and were looking to shut down the project. In hopes to keep Project Shadow going, which is in turn what would keep his granddaughter alive, presumably, Gerald Robotnik actually offered the Gizoid, which is Emerald from Sonic Battle. He's an ancient robotic superweapon that he had discovered, to the government as a bribe. Unfortunately, the bribe did not work as the Gizoid went on a rampage on the Ark. Despite all of this, Project Shadow was eventually completed after years of research, when Gerald actually produced a more advanced version of the prototype of the Ultimate Life Form with Black Doom's DNA, which is Shadow the Hedgehog. This is where the significance of the fan theory comes into play. However, the difference between Shadow the Hedgehog and the BioLizard is that Gerald imparted Shadow the Hedgehog with a heart and personality similar to that of Maria in hopes that he would not become a weapon. In addition to possessing immortality, Shadow did not need machinery to live, could complete tasks alone, and possessed both high intelligence and his own identity. The Hedgehog himself became close to those living on the Ark, especially Maria, who shared his curiosity of Earth, though he would occasionally ponder about what his true purpose was, and that is something that seems to have plagued him to this very day. We all know what happens next with Space Colony Arc. The government got more and more paranoid about the Project Shadow, and they ended up going to Space Colony Arc to actually shut down the research. They got into a scuffle with the researchers and started attacking all of them, and Shadow and Maria tried to escape from this, but in the crossfire of Shadow trying to escape, the government actually killed Maria Robotnik, which traumatized Shadow as he was sent on a pod back to Earth. The government eventually found Shadow and took him to Prison Island along with Gerald Robotnik, who they forced to continue working on his research for Shadow Shadow, but he went mad with grief because they just killed his granddaughter. So while Gerald was still working on Shadow the Hedgehog on Prison Island, he actually secretly programmed Shadow to want to carry out revenge against humanity once he awoke and altered his memories. In addition to that, he also concocted a plan that would have Space Colony Ark crash into Earth. The military knew how dangerous Project Shadow was, and they eventually sealed the island, abandoned the professor's research, and then executed Gerald Robotnik. Which brings us to Sonic Adventure 2, and then brings us to Shadow the Hedgehog. And even further past Sonic Adventure 2 and Shadow the Hedgehog, this brings us to the present day of Sonic and Shadow Generations, which actually is an unreleased game, but clearly based off of what we're seeing here, it's going to delve a little bit deeper back into Shadow's past. There's still some things and questions left unanswered, and there's still some more story to be told. Everyone who played the Shadow the Hedgehog 2005 game will remember that the game was received with very poor reception. However, the story of Shadow is still something worth exploring. There's still tons of questions that could be answered for Shadow. We're basically going to get a do-over and maybe get some more expansion to the lore of Project Shadow. With that being said, a brand new pre-order for Sonic and Shadow Generations has just leaked out, and now we get into the insane fan theory. If you look at the pre-order leak right here, one of the rewards that players will get for pre-ordering the game is Gerald Robotnik's journal detailing Shadow's creation, and if you zoom a little bit closer in on it, you will see two things. You will see Angel Island as well as the temple that appears in the Mystic Ruins in Sonic Adventure 1. So during his research and trying to learn the powers of the Chaos Energy, it's no secret that Gerald Robotnik stumbled upon Angel Island and modeled some of his creations after the Echidna tribe. It's extremely clear that when you look at the interior design of Space Colony Ark, Gerald Robotnik studied the structure that was found in the Mystic Ruins and on Angel Island in an attempt to harness his Chaos Energy. The first thing he probably discovered was this temple in the Mystic Ruins. If you've played Sonic Adventure and you made it to the end of the Lost World level, you will get to this mural right here, which depicts perfect chaos wiping out a city. It's no surprise that the civilizations that existed prior had this knack for creating murals that accurately predict events that are going to take place in the future. The first thing that was seen was this perfect chaos, so that's probably what Gerald Robotnik based the first Bio-Lizard off of. The Bio-Lizard bears a lot of resemblance to perfect chaos in a lot of ways. In addition to his ability to harness Chaos Emerald energy, it's very likely that based off of this new discovery of Gerald's journals, that perfect chaos is actually what the Bio-Lizard was based off of. Similar to how perfect chaos is kind of like this unstable, out of control monster, it's no surprise that the Bio-Lizard probably ended up emulating the same traits, and that's why that the research had to be scrapped, because he was becoming unstable. So this leaves Gerald with other options on trying to create the ultimate life form. After Gerald's failure to create the ultimate life form, and with time running out on his research and the government on his back trying to shut down the project, he then actually made it onto the surface of Angel Island. A lot of the discoveries that Gerald Robotnik made on Angel Island and the Mystic Ruins can be reflected in the construction of the Space Colony Ark, which also, by the way, you could consider this some sort of like floating island. Looking at the construction of the Ark leading up to the cannon's core, you'll see many similarities, such as the pool that Sonic slides down. You'll see this little temple area. You'll also see the snake that's similar to the temple that you see in Lost World. Also, bringing this back to the mural theory with respect to the creation of the Bio-Lizard, you'll also notice there are artificial chaos which are scattered throughout Space Colony Ark, and these were created by Gerald Robotnik to resemble an ancient god. Probably the most obvious evidence of Gerald's discovery of Angel Island and the Mystic Ruins of them all was the fact that there is a Master Emerald Shrine located directly on Space Colony Ark, so there's no way that Gerald did not model a lot of this off of Angel Island, and this leads us to the fan theory of the mural that we discovered in Hidden Palace in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which depicts something like a Super Sonic Hedgehog flying and trying to fight Dr. Robotnik over the Master Emerald, which is something that also happens in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. One thing that's for certain is that the Echidna tribe, or whoever is responsible for creating these murals, has accurately predicted many things that are going to take place in the future, which probably intrigued Gerald Robotnik when he was creating Shadow. So presumably when Gerald discovered this mural on Angel Island, he saw the Super Sonic Hedgehog with the quills standing up, and this is what he used as the basis to create Shadow the Hedgehog. The biggest dead giveaway is probably this. So if you look at Super Sonic in Sonic Adventure 1 and Sonic Adventure 2, you will notice that prior to the redesign where his quills like stick up more, you will notice that Shadow the Hedgehog's quills are the exact same as Super Sonic's, which explains why base Shadow the Hedgehog's quills look the exact same as Super Sonic's used to, because Gerald based Shadow's design off of Super Sonic. Do you want to get even more crazy? Well, look at this scene where Shadow the Hedgehog has wings in the new Sonic and Shadow Generation screenshots that leaked. You will notice that since Shadow has wings here, and then once again bring it back to the mural, if you look at Super Sonic, it looks like he almost has something similar to wings. So once again, this is a little bit more out there, but also another parallel that we could potentially draw. So now when you're playing Sonic Adventure 2 and you hear Shadow say things like, hey, maybe there's more to you than just looking like me, you kind of understand some of the context behind this. And now, given this new pre-order leak that potentially canonizes the most popular Sonic fan theory to ever exist, it all starts to make sense when you connect things. Now, it's not 100% confirmed yet, but now, based off of this, it's very likely that Sega is definitely borrowing from the popular fan theory. It can't be a coincidence that Shadow the Hedgehog looks exactly like Sonic and has all the same abilities that he has for the most part. That would just be too good to be true, especially when you consider the fact that Shadow the Hedgehog is artificially created. And this is actually a new development because I've recorded most of this video a couple days ago, but we actually have 4K versions of Gerald's journal, and this actually reveals a lot of the things that we were talking about. The first page depicts Angel Island as well as the mural in the Mystic Ruins. It says, "I deciphered the engravings on Redacted I found on a previous dig in the Mystic Ruins jungle and calculated the location of a fabled flying paradise. I went along to verify my findings and was rewarded with the spectacle of an Angel Island. The land was vast, lush, and hosted a number of biomes in close proximity to each other. I believe I could see an entire floating city at one point. Most majestic of them all was a shrine devoted to what appeared to be a massive Redacted. Could this be the legendary Redacted? Probably Chaos Emerald in the first box and Master Emerald in the second." He says, "I dared not approach or overstay my welcome. As much as I wanted to explore every inch of this island, I felt that it was a sacred land. Just setting foot on its soil felt taboo. I didn't know if any of the civilization remains. The land is vast and my stay was brief. The majesty of the emerald and the shrine will stay with me for the rest of my life." It's definitely pretty crazy to see the contrast between Gerald Robotnik and Eggman, because when Eggman sees lush grasslands, he wants to pollute them, and Gerald thinks it's angelic and beautiful. But it's confirmed that he went to the Mystic Ruins, and it's also confirmed that he went to Angel Island, so there's no way he didn't see both murals. Do you guys think that the theory of Gerald discovering Angel Island and basing Shadow's design off of Supersonic, which is why they look so similar, is actually true? So, how are we feeling about the Shadow Dark Beginnings animation? Sonic fans of old, Sonic fans of new have all come together to rejoice the potential redemption of one of the best characters in the franchise, Shadow the Hedgehog. There's been some new mysteries that have unraveled with this game. One of the biggest mysteries that surround Sonic and Shadow Generations is this mystery 4th character bio that appeared on the Japanese website of the game. You go on the website, you have a character bio for classic Sonic, and you also have a character bio for modern Sonic. There's one for Shadow the Hedgehog, and again, like we said before, there's a mystery 4th character. Who will it be? Well, we don't really know. But after the incredible teaser that we got for Sonic and Shadow Generations, a lot of people noticed this strange and mysterious robot that appeared. Especially newer Sonic fans, you know, people who are not as accustomed to the franchise. You know, maybe they just got into it recently because of the movie. They're like, who is this robot and why is he causing destruction on the art? Well, this is none other than Emerald, or the Gizoid. So some newer fans might be asking themselves like, hey, this game is called Sonic and Shadow Generations. This game is supposed to be detailing Shadow's backstory. Who is this Emerald robot and why is he appearing in the animation, causing destruction on the art? Even veteran fans may be asking themselves that question as well. Because while it's been touched on in the past, there's never been a mention of Shadow and the Gizoid's paths crossing. To understand this, you're going to need some context. Here is Emerald, aka the Gizoid. He is a robot that first appeared in, believe it or not, a Game Boy Advance Sonic the Hedgehog fighting spin-off game. No, seriously, Sonic Battle was a 2004 Game Boy spin-off, and it's from an era when Sonic the Hedgehog stories were taken just a little bit more seriously. A lot more love and care was put into crafting more compelling narratives, as opposed to
Baldy nose hair! That's the best thing I've heard all day! I gotta remember that one.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, okay? Different eras of Sonic require different types of storytelling. It was actually necessary to release a game like Sonic Colors at the time. Our story begins 4,000 years ago when an unknown ancient civilization created a robot known as the Gizoid. Could this have been the ancients from Sonic Frontiers? That is not clear, but hey, listen, it could be a headcanon. After this robot harnessed the energy of Chaos Emeralds, he would become more powerful, which also led to the destruction of the 4th great civilization. Now, some people are saying that they could also be responsible for creating the Gizoid, but one thing everything is confirmed, he wiped them out. One of the main abilities of the Gizoid is actually his ability to copy other fighters' abilities. So long as he is being fed Chaos Emeralds, he will gain further sentience and mimic not only the fighting abilities of his opponents, but also the mannerisms of those around him. In particular, a lot of people in the Sonic battle story point out that he tries to mimic Sonic as much as possible. That is because Emerald had a link with Sonic, which is one of the abilities that he has, which basically establishes a special bond with a character to control Emerald. So Sonic had a link with Emerald, so he would have undying loyalty and follow all of Sonic's commands. He also had similar links with Gerald Robotnik. And speaking of Gerald Robotnik, we now have to talk about Project Shadow. So I recently did a Project Shadow video, so let's give you a quick rundown on what it is. 50 years ago, Project Shadow was launched by the United Federation under the presence of achieving immortality. But the true intent of this project was actually to develop weapons of mass destruction. The president put Gerald Robotnik at the head of this project. He had his own reasons for participating in this project because his granddaughter Maria was sick. He wanted to use the government's funding and research facility so he could find a cure for his granddaughter's terminal illness. Following some of the research discoveries, the project's goals moved on to creating the ultimate life form. First ultimate life form was the Bio-Lizard. The Bio-Lizard was a lot more primitive and required life support and eventually went out of control, so they scrapped him, and eventually Gerald made contact with the Black Arms aliens to use Black Doom's DNA to create Shadow the Hedgehog. The rumblings of the unstable Bio-Lizard was catching attention of the government, and they were looking to shut down the project. Gerald's communicating with aliens, he's creating unstable lizards. The government's like, all right, we need to shut this freak show down immediately. During Project Shadow, Gerald Robotnik actually came across the Gizoid. So prior to the completion of Shadow the Hedgehog, Gerald did discover the Gizoid, and he learned of his powers and how to establish a link with him. He learned that Emerald was able to copy abilities. Other researchers within the facility were using his abilities to learn more advanced weaponry tactics. He was getting stronger, and as the government was breathing down Gerald's neck to shut down the project, he actually offered the Gizoid to them to buy him some time to complete his research of Project Shadow. Gerald Robotnik's journal said, "The higher-ups are threatening to shut down this research facility. I had no choice but to hand them the Gizoid to buy more time for my research. I tried to be careful and commanded it to never absorb any dangerous technologies. However, I have heard that other researchers have been making the Gizoid absorb weapons. The way to cause the Gizoid to form a new link is to show it power that surpasses that of its former master. While this possesses immense danger, I cannot risk losing Maria." And this presumably is where the Shadow Generations animation takes place. It's unclear as to when all of this actually takes place, and it looks like some retcons are on the way. Main reason being is if you look at the Sonic battle journals of Gerald Robotnik, you actually find that the Gizoid's rampage on the Ark was allegedly before Shadow's completion, so there's ways around it, right? You could say that maybe Shadow wasn't fully complete, but regardless, I like this plotline better. But as depicted in the Shadow animation, the Gizoid absorbed too many weapons and he started to go out of control, and he went on a rampage and he ended up destroying the Ark, or at least most of it. And then in the next journal, he confirms everything. He said, "My worst fears have come true. The Gizoid has absorbed enough weaponry and technology that it has started to go out of control. The resulting rampage resulted in the destruction of most of the Ark. I have deciphered the rest of the stone tablet. It says, when the Gizoid had learned all that it could, it became a god of wrath, and all was destroyed. The researchers somehow managed to subdue the Gizoid and sealed it away. Luckily, it only had one Chaos Emerald installed. If it were to have all 7 emeralds installed, it may have destroyed the whole planet. The Gizoid is too much of a liability. I tried destroying its core, but nothing I did worked, and I understand too little of the technology that built him. My best hope is to try and reprogram its AI into a free-willed, emotion-based AI." After the Gizoid accident, the Black Doom communication, whatever the hell they were doing with Shadow, and the Bio-Lizard going out of control, this is when the government shut down the facility. In Journal 7, right after the Gizoid's attack, it says, "I have heard that there was an accident at the research facility. Everything is gone. My own Maria's name was among the list of casualties, my beloved granddaughter. They tell me her parting words were bring hope to humanity. I have decided that the key word to activate the Gizoid's free-willed, emotion-based AI program will be those very words. Bring hope to humanity, my poor, poor Maria." And thus, about 50 years later, ironically enough, Dr. Eggman discovers the Gizoid and gives him a Chaos Emerald, which once again awakens him from his dormancy. However, he's basically a lobotomized version of his former self. Shadow got a vision of this unstable power that he needed to go stop. Him and Rouge the Bat went to the lab where the Gizoid was being held by Dr. Eggman, and he was attacked by robots and eventually passed out. And then the rest of the Sonic battle story plays out. Emerald is tossed away by Dr. Eggman, and he's actually discovered by Sonic the Hedgehog, who establishes a link with the Gizoid. Now, like I said before, the Gizoid is like a lobotomized baby at this point. So we progress through the entire story of Sonic Battle, where Emerald is getting trained by Sonic and friends. He's gaining Chaos Emeralds to slowly gain sentience. However, Shadow the Hedgehog Hedgehog has a connection with the Gizoid, as they're like basically adopted brothers. It's not quite clear as to whether or not he remembers those events from Space Colony Arc and his history with the Gizoid. Throughout several portions of the Sonic battle story, Shadow is chasing down Emerald trying to stop him because he knows exactly what Emerald is, and that is a weapon of mass destruction. By the end of Sonic Battle, Sonic agrees to let Emerald go with Shadow to figure out what he is and how to free him, and how to give him free will so he'll no longer be a weapon of war, where Rouge explains to Shadow their connection, how they were both given souls by Gerald Robotnik. Well-written story, and it's crazy how they're actually connecting this to the current Sonic lore. The key word to free Emerald is bring hope to humanity, which was said by Gerald Robotnik, inspired by Maria. Shadow eventually gives Emerald the 7th Chaos Emerald and helps him free himself. However, by the end of the story with 7 Chaos Emeralds, Emerald is tricked by Dr. Eggman into trying to destroy the world, and his power is awakened, which leads to a final battle with Sonic having to destroy Emerald once and for all. And that is the end of Emerald. In case I didn't do a good job of explaining it, prior to Gerald's execution and post Maria's death, while Gerald was working on Shadow, he dug up the Gizoid, and this is what he had to say in this final journal. A heritage of the past I dug out, Gizoid, and the ultimate life form I created by my own hand, Shadow. I equipped both weapons with heart. If all powers are not what is to be obtained for oneself, but what is to be born from hearts that yearn for someone, I believe all conflict should cease to exist. Please, if there's anyone listening to my prayers, bring hope to humanity. So that is why Emerald appears in the Sonic and Shadow Generations Dark Beginnings animation. It is fascinating to see them tap into more Project Shadow lore, just further clarifying and retelling the story of Shadow the Hedgehog, because it is one of the best in the franchise. Will Emerald be playable in the campaign? Will he be a boss? Will he be featured in the campaign? That all remains to be seen. I would love to see them continue to further develop this. Hope I was able to clear some things up for you.